My 16-year-old daughter spent 2 days making Thanksgiving dinner for my brother's family. She barely sat down before my sister-in-law took one bite and smiled. My daughter could have done this better. Even these rolls are embarrassing. Everyone around us laughed. Paige didn't. Neither did I. She just stared at her plate. I said nothing. I stood up, carried every dish my daughter had made back to my car, and drove her home. 4 hours later, my brother was pounding on my front door. I opened it, expecting a fight over the food. Instead, he held up his phone and asked, "Morgan, how much of Brittany's business has Paige actually been doing?" If this story pulls you in, please subscribe and stay with me. 2 days earlier, I had been standing in my kitchen with a mug of coffee going cold between my hands, while Paige covered the table with lists. When Paige was excited, she became organized. She made columns, drew arrows, and opened the worn black notebook she had carried to Brittany's house for most of the past year, turning pages full of measurements, temperatures, crossed-out timings, and comments in the margins. Too sweet. Needs acid. Second rise. 32 minutes, not 45. Try browned butter. Flour smudged the cover beside a pale coffee ring. "Okay," she said, pushing a sheet of notebook paper toward me. Turkey, dressing, mashed potatoes, green beans, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, rolls, pumpkin pie, pecan pie. I looked at her. She looked back. "That's not helping with Thanksgiving dinner." "I know. That is Thanksgiving dinner." A smile slipped out before she could stop it. Aunt Brittany said I could take the lead. That phrase made me set my coffee down. Brittany had been encouraging Paige's cooking for almost a year, and I had been grateful. She ran a small holiday catering business and rented a licensed shared kitchen for client orders. Paige's part was supposed to stay on the harmless side: recipe testing, technique practice, plating, photographs, notes. My rules were clear. School first, no school nights, no being drafted into somebody else's poor planning. I had also told Paige she could stop any time she wanted. The funny thing was that she never wanted to stop. "Take the lead where?" I asked. "At Uncle Aaron's. For Thursday." "With how many people?" 12, maybe 13 if great. Aunt Linda comes. "And Brittany is doing what?" "Helping." That is not an answer. Paige sighed, but she was smiling. "She bought the groceries. She said she'll handle anything I get behind on. The turkey's already ordered. I'm doing the prep here, and some finishing there tomorrow." I looked down at her menu again. "You are not spending Thanksgiving break working yourself into the ground so your aunt can tell people she gave you experience." Her expression changed just enough for me to notice. Not hurt. More like impatience that I was looking for a problem where she did not believe one existed. "Mom, I asked to do it." "Why?" "Because I want to know if I can." That answer stopped me. At 16, Paige was still figuring out which version of herself she trusted. In a room full of confident people, she had a way of shrinking half an inch at a time. Cooking was different. In a kitchen, she did not ask permission to know what she knew. I had seen it first with bread. She would press 2 fingers into dough and somehow know whether it needed 10 more minutes. She could smell butter before it crossed from nutty to burned. She could taste soup once and tell me it needed salt, then change her mind and reach for lemon. Brittany had noticed too. The first time she told Paige, "You have a real palate." My daughter had carried those 5 words around for weeks. So I asked the questions a mother should ask. "What time are you starting?" "After breakfast." "What time are you stopping?" "When the prep list is done." Wrong answer. She rolled her eyes. "By 6. "Homework?" "Finished yesterday." "Who paid for all this?" "Aunt Brittany and Uncle Aaron." "Are any of these for customer orders?" "No. It's our Thanksgiving dinner." "And if she suddenly asks you to do something for the business?" "I say no." I waited. Paige lifted one hand. "I say no, Mom." Only then did I nod. That boundary had never seemed theoretical. A month earlier, when Paige came home later than expected after a Saturday test session, I had called Brittany and asked exactly what my daughter was doing there. Brittany told me the customer production happened at the shared kitchen with adults, not with Paige. "She's testing ideas with me, Morgan, not working a shift," she had said. Paige had been beside her on speaker, embarrassed that I was checking. I remembered that conversation now, because it had sounded responsible. At the time, it gave me one more reason to believe I knew what this arrangement was. By 9 Wednesday morning, our kitchen smelled like toasted pecans and onions, softening in butter. Paige tied on the dark green apron Brittany had given her for her birthday and set the black notebook beside the stove where she could reach it without touching it with wet hands. I stayed out of her way as much as I could. That was harder than it sounds. When you have made Thanksgiving dinner longer than your child has been alive, instincts feel like facts. I wanted to correct the potatoes, check the pie crust, turn down a burner. I made myself wash dishes instead. Paige made the cranberry sauce first because she wanted it cold by dinner the next day. Then the pie dough, then cornbread for the dressing. The rolls took over one end of the counter, in 2 rows of smooth little rounds under a clean towel. Around noon, Brittany came by carrying 2 grocery bags and a white bakery box. "You started without me," she said. "You said 9. I said around 9. Paige glanced at the clock. "It was 12:07. Brittany laughed and kissed the side of her head. "Look at you, keeping me accountable." That was Brittany's way. She could make criticism sound affectionate and affection sound like a private joke. The family had learned to laugh with her. Aaron's repeated sweater became his uniform. Addison's slow shoe choices became a running joke. Paige measuring flour twice made her my little laboratory. Usually Paige smiled. Usually I did too. Brittany opened the bakery box and took out a row of test rolls from her own kitchen. "I brought you a comparison," she said. Paige broke one open, studied the crumb, then tasted it. "Too dry," she said. Brittany put a hand over her heart. "Cruel." Paige smiled. "You asked." I did. For the next hour, Brittany was exactly the mentor I thought she was. She showed Paige how to judge surface tension in the roll dough and why one pan browned faster. When the pecan filling looked loose, she asked Paige what would happen if she baked it as it was, instead of fixing it for her. Paige frowned, thought about it, then added 2 minutes to the stovetop stage before pouring it into the shell. I watched from the sink and felt something I had felt many times that year: relief. Brittany knew how to feed a part of Paige. I could only encourage from the edges. That was why I did not think much of it when Brittany began taking pictures. She photographed the rolls lined on the tray, the pecan pie, before it went into the oven. Paige's handwritten page with 4 earlier versions of the roll recipe crossed out at the top. "Don't get my handwriting," Paige said. "Your handwriting is part of the charm. It looks like a doctor lost a fight." Brittany laughed and took another photo. I noticed she angled the phone so the page filled the frame. At the time, I thought she was proud of her. By late afternoon, Paige's shoulders had started to droop. I pointed at the clock. 6. "I know. You have 40 minutes. I know." Brittany glanced at the prep list. "She's almost done." "She's done at 6. There was a tiny pause. Then Brittany smiled. "Bossy mother." "Effective mother." Paige groaned at both of us, but she packed away the dough at 5:58. Looking back, I had not been asleep at the wheel. I had asked, watched, and set limits. What I had failed to understand was that a boundary only protects you from the thing you know to name. The next morning, Thanksgiving, Paige was up before my alarm. But then, our car was packed with pies, foil-covered rolls, and insulated carriers of dressing, sweet potatoes, and green beans. The turkey was already at Aaron and Brittany's house for Paige to finish there. When we pulled into their driveway, Brittany opened the front door before we had even gotten everything out of the car. "There's my chef." Paige's whole face changed. It was small, but I saw it. Shoulders back, chin up. Inside, Aaron moved folding chairs, while Addison set glasses. At 17, Addison was comfortable being watched in a way Paige had never been: volleyball, student council, school presentations. "Smells good," Addison said when Paige passed with the dressing. "Thanks. Mom says you're doing basically everything." Paige glanced toward Brittany. "Pretty much." Addison gave a low whistle. "I would die." It did not sound jealous. It did not sound cruel. It sounded like the truth. The house filled through the afternoon. Great Aunt Linda came, along with 2 cousins and their spouses. By 3, every flat surface held a glass, serving spoon, or somebody's phone. Paige moved through it all, with focused calm. She checked the turkey, reheated the sides, brushed the rolls with butter, adjusted the cranberry sauce with orange zest after tasting it. When the gravy tightened too much, she loosened it before Brittany even noticed. I helped where she asked, and nowhere else. At one point, I found Brittany standing on a chair near the kitchen island, taking photographs from above. "Please tell me that's not going on social media before we eat," I said. She climbed down. "Just content. For Thanksgiving?" "For the business page. Holiday inspiration." Nothing about that struck me as dangerous. Brittany had photographed Paige's food before and talked for months about helping both girls build experience. Holiday photographs sounded exactly like what she said they were. Paige was too busy checking the rolls to react. A few minutes later, she did something that changed Brittany's face. Not dramatically. If I had not been looking straight at her, I might have missed it. Paige set the last pan on the cooling rack and said, almost to herself, "I think I'm finally going to organize my own portfolio over Christmas break." Brittany's smile held for half a second too long. "Your own portfolio?" Paige nodded. "Just the stuff I've been working on. The versions, photos, notes. I want to see what it looks like all together." "That's a lot of work." "I know. You don't have to rush." "I'm not. I just want one." Brittany's fingers tightened around her phone, then relaxed. "That's great," she said. "We'll talk about it." Then she turned toward the dining room and called everyone to the table. I remember thinking she sounded tired. That was all. Dinner looked beautiful. The turkey skin was deep brown and crisp. Pecans browned over the sweet potatoes. The green beans were still bright. Her rolls sat glossy with butter, in a blue-lined basket. Paige stood behind her chair for a second while everyone looked at the table. Aaron put a hand on her shoulder. "You did all this?" "With some help." "Mostly her," Brittany said. Paige smiled. That smile is the part I wish I could forget. What I saw on her face was relief more than pride, as if 12 plates on a table had finally proven something she had been trying to prove for months. We sat. The usual noise started: passing dishes, asking for butter, teasing Aaron about the wine. Paige took a little of everything but barely ate, glancing up whenever someone tasted something. Great Aunt Linda praised the dressing. One cousin asked what Paige had put in the cranberry sauce. Aaron took a second roll. Then Brittany picked up hers. She tore it open, looked at the inside, and took one bite. I saw her eyes move to Paige. "My daughter could have done this better," she said. "Even these rolls are embarrassing." For one beat, the table went still. Then everyone around us laughed. Aaron laughed first, one short, surprised sound, as if Brittany had made one of her usual teasing comments. Great Aunt Linda chuckled. The cousins joined in. Addison laughed too, then looked at her mother like she was waiting for the rest of the joke. There was no rest of the joke. Paige did not laugh. Neither did I. She lowered her eyes to her plate. Her fork was still in her hand. I watched her thumb press against the handle until the skin went white. Brittany reached for the butter. Something in me became very quiet. I did not ask what she meant. I did not tell her she was cruel. I did not explain that Paige had spent 2 days making the meal they were eating, or remind everyone that half of them had already complimented it. I said nothing. I stood up. My chair scraped the floor hard enough to stop the laughter. I walked into the kitchen and picked up the first casserole dish Paige had brought. Behind me, someone said my name. I kept moving. The dressing, sweet potatoes, green beans, and cranberry sauce went back into their carriers. I boxed the pies and wrapped the rolls in the same foil Paige had removed 20 minutes earlier. Aaron came to the kitchen doorway. "Morgan, what are you doing?" I did not answer him. Brittany appeared behind him, her mouth curved in disbelief. "Oh, come on. It was a joke." I set the gravy container inside a tote. Paige was still at the table. I looked at her and held out my hand. "Coat." That was all I said. She stood. Nobody laughed this time. The carved turkey was hardest to move. Paige had roasted and basted it and made the gravy from its drippings, so it counted. I covered the platter, carried it out with both hands, and set it flat in my SUV. By the time I came in for the last dish, Brittany had stopped smiling. "You cannot be serious." I lifted the basket of rolls. I was very serious. Every dish my daughter had made went back into my car. Not one stayed on that table. I took Paige home. For the first 10 minutes of the drive, she said nothing. Outside, the November sky was already turning the color of dirty silver. Bare trees flickered past the passenger window. The heater blew warm air over the smell of turkey, butter, sage, and pie trapped inside the car. Paige kept her face turned toward the glass. At a red light, I reached across the console. She took my hand, but she still did not look at me. "I thought they liked it," she said finally. The sentence hurt more than if she had cried. "They did. Then why did everybody laugh?" I had no answer that would make the moment smaller, so I did not try to make it smaller. "They followed her," I said. Paige swallowed. Addison laughed. "I know. Uncle Aaron did too." "I know." She pulled her hand back and folded both arms over herself. By the time we got home, anger had started arriving under my shock. I carried the food inside while Paige changed, then put everything away because practical things still need doing when your family has shown you something ugly. 10 minutes later, Paige came into the kitchen, wearing sweatpants and an old-school hoodie. Her eyes were red, but she had not been crying long. "Mom." I closed the refrigerator. "Please don't make this bigger." I looked at her. "I mean it. Don't call Uncle Aaron. Don't post anything. Don't send Aunt Brittany some huge message." I wasn't planning to post anything. You know what I mean. I did. She wanted the humiliation contained inside one dining room, untouched long enough to pretend it had meant less than it felt like it meant. "All right," I said. Her shoulders loosened a little. "I'm not going to chase anybody tonight." "Thank you. But we're not going back over there and pretending it didn't happen." She looked down. "I know. I let that be enough." We ate pie at our own kitchen counter just after 7, not Thanksgiving dinner. Neither of us wanted the full meal again. 2 pieces of Paige's pecan pie, cold milk for her, coffee for me. The pie was excellent. I did not tell her that 3 times. Once was enough. At 9:34, someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. Paige froze with her glass halfway to the sink. I looked toward the hallway. The pounding came again, fast and hard enough to rattle the narrow frame beside the door. I checked the window before opening it. Aaron stood on my porch without a coat. His hair was windblown, his face pale in the porch light, and his phone was clenched in one hand. I unlocked the door but left the chain on. "What? Morgan? Open the door?" His voice did not sound angry. That frightened me more than anger would have. "I need to ask you something about Paige." I stared at Aaron through the narrow gap between the door and the frame. For a second, neither of us moved. The porch light cut his face into sharp planes I did not usually see on my brother. He looked less like a man who had driven across town to continue a family argument, and more like somebody who had found a loose floorboard in his own house and was afraid of what might be underneath it. Behind me, I heard Paige set her glass down. "What about her?" I asked. Aaron glanced past my shoulder, saw Paige in the kitchen, and lowered his voice. "Can I come in?" I almost told him no. 4 hours earlier, he had laughed while my daughter stared at her plate. That fact had not softened, just because he was standing on my porch without a coat. Then he turned his phone around. The screen showed a page I had never seen before. At the top was Addison's name. Under it were photographs of food. I recognized one of them, not because I had eaten it, because I had watched Paige spend 2 Saturday afternoons trying to get the shape right. I slid the chain free. "Come in." Aaron stepped inside and rubbed his hands together, as if he had only just noticed the cold. He did not take off his shoes until I pointed at the mat. That alone told me how unsettled he was. My brother was the kind of man who wiped his feet twice, even when the sidewalk was dry. Paige stayed near the kitchen counter. Aaron looked at her, and whatever sentence he had prepared disappeared. "I'm sorry," he said. Paige's face closed. He swallowed. "About dinner." I laughed. No one filled the silence for him. "I thought Brittany was doing what she always does," he continued. "One of those stupid little digs everybody is supposed to know is a joke. Then you looked down and Morgan got up and..." He exhaled through his nose. "I should have stopped laughing the second I saw your face. I didn't." Paige looked at the floor. "I know," she said. It was not forgiveness. Aaron seemed to understand that. He nodded once and turned back to me. "This isn't why I came." He held out the phone again. The page had a clean white background, a narrow gold line along one side, and Addison's name in a large serif font. Beneath it were 3 food photographs arranged in a grid. One showed a lacquered pear tart. Another showed rolls in a dark cast-iron pan. The third was a plated savory pastry with roasted squash and herbs. In the corner of the screenshot, I could see the name of a folder. Heartland Addison. I looked at Aaron. "What is Heartland?" "I don't know exactly. Some culinary fellowship Addison applied for." Paige's head came up. Aaron saw it. "You know about it?" "No." The answer came too fast to be anything but true. Aaron swiped to the next screenshot. It was not a website. It looked like a PDF export or presentation page. A heading read Development Process. Under that were smaller images. Dough in a mixing bowl, a hand holding a spoon over a filling, a final plated dish. I recognized one of the hands. Paige has a tiny white scar near the base of her left thumb from trying to cut a frozen bagel when she was 12. The hand in the photograph had the same scar. My stomach tightened. "Where did you get this?" "Brittany's laptop." "You went through her laptop?" "No." He shook his head quickly. "After you left, she started freaking out about the pictures." "Pictures of what?" "The dinner. The food. She said she needed the shots she took today, and the process pictures from yesterday. She kept saying you took everything before she got what she needed. That made no sense. She already took pictures." "I know. That's what I said." Aaron rubbed his forehead. "He told me the house had emptied fast after we left. Great Aunt Linda had stayed just long enough to help stack plates. One cousin offered to order pizza, which no one found funny. Addison had gone upstairs after a fight with Brittany about whether the whole thing had really been a joke. Aaron started cleaning because cleaning was what he did when he did not know whose side he was supposed to be on. Brittany had not cleaned. She had moved between her phone and laptop, opening old folders, checking cloud albums, searching for images. At first, Aaron assumed she was trying to salvage Thanksgiving content for the business page. That matched what I had heard her say. Then he noticed one folder name. Heartland. He asked what it was. Brittany said it was Addison's culinary fellowship material. Aaron had been surprised because Addison cooked, but not obsessively. She liked decorating cakes and could put together a good pasta dish, I had seen her make cookies at Christmas. But Aaron knew what his daughter's interests looked like, and cooking had never taken over their garage shelves with notebooks, flour bins, and testing pans the way it had Paige's life. When he asked why there were photographs of food Paige had made, Brittany told him Paige had helped with some of it. Then Aaron recognized the rolls, not Thanksgiving's rolls. An earlier version Paige had carried to their house in October. The batch she complained had been too dense because she had rushed the second rise. Aaron asked again. This time Brittany said, "The girls collaborated." He stared at her long enough that she apparently added, "It's normal. That's what mentoring looks like." "What happened after that?" I asked. She got mad that I kept asking. "That's not an answer." "I know." He glanced at Paige. "She said I was turning Thanksgiving into something it wasn't. She said you were angry, and I was letting you make me suspicious." I felt heat rise under my skin. Paige shifted beside the counter. "Did Aunt Brittany say I knew about that?" Aaron looked at her. "She said you knew the girls were putting material together." Paige shook her head. "No." One word, barely louder than the refrigerator. Aaron looked back at the screenshot, as if he hoped the phone might correct him. "What did you think she was taking the pictures for?" Paige folded her arms. "Sometimes her business page. Sometimes she said she was helping me keep stuff for later." "For your portfolio?" "I guess." "You guess?" She gave him a look that was suddenly very 16. "I wasn't filing taxes on it, Uncle Aaron. She took pictures. She sent some to me. She told me I should save things I was proud of." Aaron winced. "Okay, fair." I stepped between the two of them before questioning turned into pressure. "How did you get the screenshots?" Aaron said that while Brittany was searching, she had opened an exported set of pages and walked away when her phone rang. He saw Addison's name at the top, saw the cast iron rolls, then saw another photograph he remembered Paige taking in their kitchen. He took 2 pictures of the screen before Brittany came back. "That's all." "That's all." "You don't know if this was submitted?" "No." "You don't know if those are final pages?" "No." "You don't know what Addison put in herself?" "No." "Good." Not good in the ordinary sense. Good because facts mattered more than the feeling roaring through me. I did not want a story. I wanted to know what had happened. I took the phone from him again. The first page showed 3 finished dishes. The second showed process photographs. There was no visible statement saying original work, no signature, no submission date, nothing that told me whether I was looking at a final application or a draft Brittany had assembled and never used. But Paige's hand was still in one of the photographs. That was a fact. "Paige," I said carefully, "how much stuff have you sent Brittany?" Her eyes moved from me to Aaron and back again. "I don't know. Pictures?" "A lot." "How many is a lot?" She rubbed her thumb against the sleeve of her hoodie. "I don't count them." I could hear the answer she wanted me to accept. Normal teenager, normal messages, no reason to make this ugly. I kept my voice even. "Did you send her recipes?" "Not full recipes all the time." "What did you send?" "Notes, pictures. Sometimes I'd text what I changed if something worked." Aaron sat down at the edge of one of my kitchen chairs. Paige looked at him and became more guarded. I said, "You don't have to answer him. I'm asking." That relaxed her by a fraction. She told me the routine had changed gradually. At first, she went to Brittany's house because Brittany had better baking pans and new techniques Paige wanted to learn. They would choose one thing and work on it for an afternoon. A tart shell, a dinner roll, a cranberry glaze. Brittany would explain something, Paige would try it, and they would both taste the result. That was the arrangement I knew. Then, over time, Brittany started texting between sessions. "Can you try this with less sugar? What happens if you swap the thyme for sage? Can you photograph the crumb when it cools? Could you plate that on the white dish?" Paige liked being asked. That was the part that hurt to hear. She said it without drama, almost defensively, as if she needed me to understand that she had not been dragged into anything. She actually listened to me, Paige said. Like if I said something wasn't working. She didn't just tell me I was a kid. I kept my expressions still. How often were you doing that? I don't know. Once a month? No. Once a week? Sometimes. Sometimes turned out to cover a lot of ground. There had been Saturdays when Paige told me she was going over for 2 hours and stayed 4. Not because Brittany locked the door or threatened her. Because a crust was cracking, or a glaze was separating, or Brittany would say they were close, and Paige hated leaving a problem unfinished. If I texted, Paige answered. If I asked whether she needed a ride, she usually said Brittany would bring her home. I had noticed the late returns. I had not understood what filled the extra time. What were you doing for 4 hours? I asked. Trying things. Whose things? Paige frowned at the question. Both, I guess. That answer bothered me more than a clean accusation would have. It meant the boundary between learning and producing had not disappeared in one obvious moment. It had blurred. She described one Saturday when Brittany had been working on a winter brunch idea. Paige changed the spice in a fruit filling, then changed the dough, because it baked too hard around the edges. Brittany took pictures after every version. Paige remembered being pleased because Brittany kept asking what she thought instead of simply telling her what to do. What happened to the final version? I asked. I don't know. She said she might use it. For the business? Maybe. You didn't ask? Paige's cheeks colored. No. I could see her preparing to defend herself, so I did not ask why. The answer was already in front of me. She had been 16, working beside an adult she trusted, being told her opinion mattered. She had not thought she needed a contract for every bowl of filling. That did not make the situation harmless. It only made it understandable. Aaron looked up. Paige saw his face and snapped. Not like a job. I didn't say it was. You looked like you were going to. He shut his mouth. I asked whether she had ever gone to the shared commercial kitchen for client production. No. Worked in order? No. Packed customer meals? No. That matched what Brittany had told me before, and the small relief I felt only made the rest more confusing. So, this was all testing? Mostly. Testing. Pictures. Helping her figure out stuff. Mostly. Paige hesitated. Sometimes she'd say they were using one of the versions for the holiday menu. That answer opened the first real gap in what I thought I knew. I thought about every time Brittany had described Paige's weekends as practice. Did you know they were serving your versions to customers? Some of them. I mean, I knew Aunt Brittany liked them. That is not the same question. I know. Her voice sharpened. I stopped. Part of me wanted to keep going until I had every answer that night. Another part recognized the look on my daughter's face. 4 hours earlier, she had been laughed at by people she trusted. I was not going to turn my kitchen into another table where adults examined her. I set Aaron's phone down. Okay. Paige blinked. Okay. We're not interrogating you. I'm not being interrogated. You're starting to feel like you are. She looked away, which was answer enough. Aaron stood. I should go. I wanted him gone, but there was one thing I needed before he left. When you go back, don't tell Brittany Paige denied anything. He frowned. Why? Because I don't know what this is yet. She's my wife, Morgan. And Paige is my daughter. His jaw moved. I expected him to argue. Instead, he looked toward Paige. I'm going to ask Brittany what the folder is. That's your choice. And if she asks what Paige said, tell her to ask Paige herself. Paige stiffened. I realized immediately that I had stepped too close to making a decision for her. I turned. Unless you don't want that. She thought for a moment. No, that's fine. I nodded. Aaron picked up his phone, but he did not leave. There's something else. I waited. He looked miserable. When you carried the food out, I was mad at you. That does not surprise me. I thought you were making a scene without saying anything. I was. His mouth twitched once, but it was not a smile. Then, after everybody left, I kept seeing Paige's face. Paige stared at the floor again. Aaron's voice dropped. I laughed before anyone else. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. No one rescued him from the admission. He looked at Paige. I'm sorry. She nodded once. Again, not forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. Then he left. I watched through the front window until his taillights disappeared at the end of the street. When I turned around, Paige had Aaron's screenshots open on my phone. He had texted them to me before walking out. She enlarged the process page. I sat beside her at the table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The house was quiet, in the odd post-holiday way that made every appliance seem louder. The refrigerator clicked. Pipes shifted in the wall. Somewhere down the block, a car door slammed. Paige zoomed in on the cast-iron rolls. I made those at her house. Are you sure? Yes. She did not sound wounded now. She sounded focused. That voice I knew. Kitchen voice. She swiped to the savory pastry. This one too. Sort of. What does sort of mean? Aunt Brittany had the idea for the filling. I changed the dough because hers kept leaking. That sounds like both of you worked on it. Yeah. I was grateful for the complication. It would have been emotionally easier if every photograph were obviously Paige's and everyone else were obviously lying. But easy stories are usually the ones people tell when they have already decided what they want to believe. Paige pointed to the pear tart. I plated that, but Addison was there. Did Addison make it? She did some of it. How much? I don't remember. Again, not clean. Then Paige stopped on another image in the lower corner of the page. A small tray of browned butter apple hand pies, each one scored with 3 diagonal cuts. The photograph was taken on a pale wooden board. I remembered the board because Brittany owned it, and Paige had once asked me where she could buy one like it. Wait, Paige said. She got up so fast the chair legs scraped. What? My notebook. It was not in the kitchen. Genuine panic crossed her face. I left it at Aunt Brittany's. My stomach dropped. Then she shook her head. No. I brought it home yesterday. She ran to the small desk in the living room and pulled open the bottom drawer. The black notebook was under a school binder. When she came back, she was already flipping pages. I forced myself not to grab it. She stopped in October. There were 2 pages of notes for the hand pies. Version 1, filling too wet. Version 2, crust split. Version 3, brown butter, chill filling first. A date sat in the upper corner. October 18. Paige opened her photo roll and searched. The same hand pies appeared on her phone, photographed from almost the same angle as the image in Aaron's screenshot. Same pale board. Same 3 cuts in each crust. Her image had a timestamp from that Saturday afternoon. Aaron's screenshot had no date I could see. I looked from one phone to the other. Did you send this to Brittany? Probably. She was there. Was Addison? Paige did not answer. She flipped backward 1 page, then forward again. I watched her read her own cramped handwriting, her finger moving down the margin where she had noted who tasted each version. B, too much cinnamon. Mom liked V2 crust. A, H, was nowhere on the page. Paige stared at it. I felt the mystery change shape. Until then, I had been asking whether Brittany had used Paige's photographs. Now another question pushed in behind it. Used them for what exactly? Mom. Paige turned the notebook toward me and tapped October 18. Her face had gone pale. Addison wasn't there when I made this. For several seconds after Paige said it, neither of us moved. The notebook was open between us to October 18. On my phone, Aaron's screenshot showed the browned butter hand pies under Addison's name. On Paige's page, the same day held 3 failed versions, 2 arrows, a note about chilling the filling, and no trace that Addison had been there. I wanted to turn every page in that notebook before we went to bed. That was exactly why I closed my mouth. Paige had already spent Thanksgiving being watched, judged, and laughed at. Then Aaron and I had spent an hour asking her to explain work she had never thought she would have to defend. If I kept going because I was frightened, I would only be turning fear into another kind of pressure. So we stopped. Friday passed quietly. Paige slept late, ate leftovers standing at the counter, and ignored 2 texts from relatives asking whether she was okay. Saturday she went for coffee with a friend and left her black notebook in the desk drawer. I did not touch it. By Sunday morning, November 30th, she brought it to me herself. She set it on the kitchen table next to her phone and said, "Not everything." I was rinsing a mug. Not everything. What? We're not going through the whole year. I don't want to sit here for 6 hours proving I cooked things. The fact that she had thought about how she wanted to do this mattered. Okay, I said. She opened the notebook to the middle. 3 things. Maybe 4. Stuff I remember clearly. That became our rule. We were not building a case. We were trying to understand what had happened. The first thing Paige chose was the apple hand pie from Aaron's screenshot. The second was the cast iron roll recipe. The third was a roasted squash pastry Brittany had once called too fussy for customers, before a nearly identical version appeared on her holiday menu in early November. Paige laid her phone beside the notebook and started matching dates. The hand pies were easy. October 18th. 3 versions in one afternoon. The first leaked because the apples released too much liquid. The second held, but the crust cracked along the fold. On the third, Paige browned the butter, chilled the filling, and changed the vent cuts. She had photographs of all 3. Brittany appeared in one picture, only as a hand holding the pale wooden board steady. Addison appeared in none. The rolls took longer to untangle because Paige had been working on them for weeks. She had started with a basic enriched dough Brittany showed her in September. That part was real. Brittany had explained why too much flour could make the crumb tight and showed Paige how to read the surface instead of blindly trusting a recipe. Then Paige kept changing it. One Saturday she reduced the yeast. The next she changed the milk temperature. Another time she added browned butter and wrote in the margin, "Better flavor, slower rise." The version in Aaron's screenshot was version 4. I remembered version 2 because Paige had brought half the batch home and made me eat one while she stood over the sink complaining that they felt like dinner rolls from a gas station. At the time, I had laughed. On Sunday, with Aaron's screenshot open beside us, that memory did not feel funny. "What did Brittany do on version 4? I asked. Paige thought before answering. "She told me to use the cast iron pan. Anything else? She said I should brush the tops with cream." "Did that change the dough?" "No." I nodded. Paige narrowed her eyes at me. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "That little lawyer face?" "I don't have a lawyer face." "You absolutely do." Despite everything, I almost smiled. Then she turned the page. The squash pastry was messier. Brittany had come up with the roasted squash filling and the idea of serving it as a small savory pastry. Paige had changed the dough after the first batch leaked. Later she changed the fold. Addison had helped plate the final version during one afternoon, Paige remembered, because Addison kept stealing roasted pumpkin seeds from the tray. That one was not Paige's alone, and I let Paige be the one to say it. I wrote nothing down. By lunchtime, a shape had begun to emerge that was more complicated than theft and more troubling than mentorship. Paige had not been making customer orders. She had not been clocking shifts in Brittany's commercial kitchen. She had not been secretly working a job while I looked the other way. What she had been doing was earlier in the chain. Brittany would bring an idea home from the business or ask Paige to try something she had been considering. Paige would test it. Sometimes Brittany worked beside her. Sometimes she gave a starting technique or ingredient. Sometimes Paige took the problem home and kept working on it alone. When something finally worked, Brittany photographed the result, asked for process shots, or told Paige to send her the changes. Then, later, a polished version appeared somewhere else, on the catering page, on a printed holiday menu, inside the Heartland folder Erin had photographed. The adult staff at the licensed kitchen were still the people who produced actual customer orders. Nothing in Paige's notebook suggested otherwise. But the ideas reaching that kitchen had not all begun there. That distinction should have comforted me. Instead, it made me understand how easy the whole arrangement had been to hide in plain sight. If Brittany had ever said, "I need your 16-year-old daughter to work 4 hours Saturday developing a product I may sell," I would have asked 10 questions. She never said that. She said, "Paige has a good instinct for this." She said, "I'm teaching her." She said, "She loves it." All 3 things were true. Truth was doing most of the camouflage. By early afternoon, Paige had chosen a 4th item, a pear and cranberry tart she had first tested in late September. We compared her photos with a post from Brittany's business page dated October 2nd. The caption called it a new seasonal tart. The photograph was not Paige's exact image. The plate was different and the garnish had changed. But the shape of the crust, the filling ratio, and the uneven little notch at one edge were familiar enough that Paige went still. "That's mine," she said. Then she corrected herself. "No, wait." I said nothing. She scrolled backward through her pictures. Aunt Brittany showed me the crust. She found the first test. It was much paler, with a thicker edge. I changed the filling. Another photograph. And I started doing the edge like this, because the first one got soggy. She looked at the business post again. Her face tightened. I don't know what to call that. Neither did I. That uncertainty kept me from turning Brittany into a cartoon in my own head. She had taught Paige things. She had supplied ingredients and ideas. Some dishes had clearly been collaborative. Some had not. What I could no longer accept was the story I had been told that Paige was simply practicing, while Brittany generously gave her experience. The practice had value to somebody besides Paige. And nobody had told me how much. Around 3, I made the mistake. It started with something small. I asked Paige to hand me her phone so I could save copies of the photographs we had matched. She did. I made a folder on my laptop, then another. I began labeling files with dates. October 18 hand pies, October 24 rolls, October 2 pear tart. Paige watched me for a minute. "What are you doing?" "Saving what we know." "Why?" "In case something disappears." Her expression changed. I kept going anyway. I sevenographed 2 notebook pages and emailed them to myself. "I'm going to send these to Aaron," I said. "He needs to know this isn't just one picture." Paige reached across the table and put her hand over the notebook. "Don't." I looked up. "Paige." I said don't. "We need copies." "Why do we need copies right now?" "Because Brittany has the originals of some of those pictures. She has the folder, and we don't know what she's doing with any of it." My voice had risen without my noticing. Paige pulled the notebook toward herself. "I know that." "Then you understand why I don't want to wait." "For what?" "For her to change something, delete something, tell Aaron another story. I should call him now." Paige shut the notebook. The sound was soft. The effect was not. "No." I stared at her. "We literally agreed we were trying to understand what happened. And now you understand enough to take over." "That is not what I'm doing." "You made folders." "Yes. You're copying my notebook. Because it matters. It mattered before you thought Aunt Brittany did something wrong." That stopped me. Paige stood. Her cheeks had gone pink, but her voice stayed low. "You're making it sound like I was stupid." "I do not think you were stupid. Then stop talking about this like I spent a year handing things to some criminal because I couldn't tell what was happening. I didn't say that. You don't have to. She hugged the notebook against her chest. I liked going there. I know. No, you keep saying you know, but you're looking at every good memory like it was fake. That is not what I'm saying. She taught me things. I know she did. She was good to me. The last sentence came out harder. I had no quick answer for it. Because Brittany had been good to her. Not always. Not completely. Maybe not for the reasons Paige believed. But enough. Enough that Paige was not only losing trust in a person. She was being asked to reconsider months in which she had felt capable, useful, and seen. My anger had made that part disappear. Paige stepped back from the table. I'm done. With the notebook? With this. She took it upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen with 4 labeled folders open on my laptop and felt exactly as competent as I deserved to feel. For nearly a year, I had worried that I was giving my daughter too much freedom. Now, in less than one afternoon, I had managed to make the opposite mistake. I had turned protection into possession. The first message from Brittany arrived 20 minutes later. Not to me, to Paige. I knew because Paige came halfway down the stairs holding her phone. She did not hand it over. She texted me. I kept my hands flat on the table. What did she say? Paige read it herself. Your mother is turning something you loved into a fight. I taught you too. There was more beneath it. Paige's eyes moved over the screen. What else? She says Uncle Aaron is asking questions because you're angry about Thanksgiving. I could feel a response forming in me before Paige had finished. I swallowed it. What do you think? She looked almost annoyed that I had asked. I don't know. That was worse than anger. She sat on the 3rd step from the bottom. For a moment she looked younger than 16. Aunt Brittany did teach me. Yes, she didn't just take stuff. No. And you said that too yesterday. I did. Paige looked down at the message. She says she never hid that she might use things for the business. I remembered the sentence from Thursday. Sometimes she'd say they were using one of the versions for the holiday menu. Again, not entirely false. Did she say anything about Heartland? I asked. Paige shook her head. Did you ask? No. Do you want to? She hesitated. Then she locked her phone. No. I wanted to tell her that silence helped Brittany. I wanted to tell her that if somebody was using her work under another girl's name, waiting was dangerous. I wanted to tell her 5 things at once. Instead I said, okay. Paige looked at me suspiciously. That's it? That's it. She went back upstairs with the notebook. She did not leave it on the desk this time. She took it with her. That was the first real consequence of my panic. I no longer had access to the best record of what Paige had done, and I had nobody to blame for that part but myself. Sunday evening, I did not touch her phone, her notebook, or Aaron's screenshots. I looked at my own messages. That sounds less dramatic than it felt. I had nearly a year of ordinary texts with Brittany. Birthday plans, school pickups, grocery questions, complaints about our mother's habit of forwarding chain messages. Buried among them were the Saturdays when Paige had gone over to cook. I did not read every conversation. I searched one phrase. Need her. The results surprised me. January 26. Any chance I can steal Paige for 2 hours Saturday? I need her opinion on something. March 9. I need her taste buds. Don't let her make plans. May 18. Tell your girl I need her magic hands tomorrow. August 30. Does Paige have time this weekend? I need her for the fall menu tests. October 11. I know she has school stuff, but I really need her eyes on one thing. At the time, those messages had sounded affectionate. The kind of thing adults say when they want a teenager to feel important. I opened the January thread. I had replied with a laughing emoji. And, as long as homework is done. The next day, Paige came home talking about citrus curd. 3 weeks later, Brittany's business page introduced a lemon cardamom tart. March 9th led to a Saturday Paige spent trying different glazes on roasted carrots. Later that month, Brittany posted a spring catering menu with honey citrus carrots. May led to a shortbread experiment. August led directly to the first version of the squash pastry. October 11th was the cast iron rolls. I stopped after 5. 5 was enough to establish a pattern. The old messages did not prove who owned an idea. They did not prove Addison had done anything wrong. They did not prove the Heartland pages had ever left Brittany's laptop. But they changed what I thought the phrase "I need her" meant. I had heard affection. Now, I could also hear dependency. Paige came downstairs around 8 for water. I did not call her over. She noticed my laptop anyway. "What are you doing?" "Looking at my own texts." Her eyes went to the screen. I turned it slightly so she could see without inviting her closer. "I searched the days Brittany asked me if you could come over." Paige stood there a moment. "Why?" "Because those are mine to look at." She understood what I meant. I was not taking the notebook. I was not taking her phone. The tightness in her shoulders eased a little. I showed her only the 5 dates. No speech, no conclusion. She read them. Then she looked at the dates of the business posts I had written beside them on a piece of scrap paper. January, March, May, August, October. Her mouth pressed into a line. "Some of those were her ideas," she said. "I know. The lemon tart was mostly hers at first." "Okay. And I didn't make the customer ones." "I know." She stared at October 11. "What did you think 'I need her' meant?" The question was quiet. "I thought she liked working with you." Paige looked back at the laptop. "So did I." That was all she said. It was enough. Monday came with school. The normality of it felt insulting. At 6:45 inches the morning, Paige stood in the hallway looking for one sneaker while the television talked about holiday shopping. She had a chemistry quiz. I had work emails. The dishwasher needed unloading. A family mystery does not pause algebra. I drove her to school because neither of us had slept well. At the curb, she reached for the door handle, then stopped. "Don't call Heartland." I wasn't going to. "Or Addison." "I won't." She studied my face. "Or Aunt Brittany." I almost said, "She already contacted you." I did not. "Not without talking to you." That answer seemed to satisfy her. She got out. For the rest of the day, I worked from home and left the story alone. At 4:15, Paige came through the door, dropped her backpack by the stairs, and went straight to the kitchen. She had the notebook in the backpack. I saw the black corner through the open zipper. I did not mention it. We were halfway through reheating soup when Aaron texted me. Not a question. A screenshot. He had written one line above it. "Found this in our household email. You need to see the date." I opened the image. It was an automated confirmation from Heartland Young Culinary Fellowship. "Thank you for your submission. Applicant: Addison Hayes. Portfolio received." The timestamp was November 21. 6 days before Thanksgiving. I read it twice, then a third time. All the uncertainty Aaron had brought to my door Thursday night shifted. The folder was not merely a working draft Brittany had assembled and forgotten. Something under Addison's name had been submitted. Paige saw my face. "What?" I turned the phone toward her. She did not touch it. Her eyes moved over the confirmation. November 21. Applicant: Addison Hayes. Portfolio received. Her breathing changed. Not faster. Shallower. I said, "We still don't know what was in the final submission." She nodded. "We still don't know what Addison knew." Another nod. I forced myself to keep the next sentence factual. "We know it was sent." Paige put down her spoon. "Show me Aaron's screenshot again." I opened it. She moved her chair closer, not to me but to the phone. The cast iron rolls filled the center of the page beneath Addison's name. Paige stared at them. I knew those rolls too. Version 1 had been heavy. Version 2 had been dry. Version 3 had tasted right, but spread too far in the pan. Version 4 was the batch in that photograph. Paige had spent 4 tries learning how to make them work. Now I was looking at them inside a portfolio that had been officially submitted 6 days before Thanksgiving. At the top of the page, in clean black letters, was the name, Addison Hayes. For a long time, Paige did nothing but stare at Addison's name. I did not say her cousin had stolen from her. I did not say Brittany had put the portfolio together herself. I did not even say the word cheated. The submission receipt had given us one new fact and nothing more. A portfolio under Addison's name had been received by Heartland on November 21st. Aaron's screenshots showed food Paige recognized inside a Heartland folder. The distance between those two facts was smaller than it had been the night he came to my door, but it was still a distance. Paige was not interested in that distinction yet. She knew, she said. I looked at her. We don't know that. She stood next to that food. Some of it. She let her name go on it. We don't know what she saw before it was sent. Paige pushed her chair back hard enough that one leg caught on the rug. Mom, her name is literally at the top. I understood why she was angry with me for keeping the sentences careful. Carefulness can sound like betrayal when somebody you love has just found their work under another person's name. But I had spent Sunday learning what happened when fear made me move faster than Paige could. So I said only, yes, her name is at the top. She grabbed her backpack and went upstairs without finishing the soup. The next evening, Tuesday, she came home from school still angry. I knew because she did not drop her backpack by the stairs. She carried it all the way into the kitchen, set it carefully on a chair, and took out the black notebook as if it had become something breakable. Can I use your laptop? She asked. I closed the spreadsheet I had been working on. For what? Heartland. That was the first time she had said the name without flinching. I turned the laptop toward her. She searched the program and found its public application page. The site was plain, mostly white with photographs of teenagers in aprons and short paragraphs about the tuition scholarship and summer apprenticeship. We were not looking for loopholes. We wanted to know what Addison had actually been required to claim. Paige found the section before I did. Here. She read silently, then read it again. The rules were simple enough that neither of us needed somebody to translate them. Collaborative work was allowed. Applicants could submit recipes or projects developed with another student, teacher, mentor, or family member. But collaborators had to be identified, and the applicant could not present work primarily developed by someone else as original solo work. There was a separate sentence about process material. Photographs, test notes, development descriptions, and creator statements had to accurately reflect the applicant's role. Paige leaned back. So, if Addison helped, that's allowed. Yes. If Aunt Brittany taught us something, that's allowed too. Yes. She looked at me. Then this isn't about whether other people touch the food. No. That mattered. The difference between collaboration and appropriation was not whether two people had stood in the same kitchen. It was whether the record told the truth about what each person had done. Aaron had spent most of Monday night sleeping in his den. I knew because he told me so in a text that contained no complaint and no request for sympathy. He had also told me Brittany would not discuss the portfolio with him beyond repeating that the girls had collaborated. Tuesday morning, he had gone back through the household email account and found the submission confirmation we already knew about. Attached to it was a saved PDF receipt and a link to the uploaded materials. The account belonged to the family, and Aaron had been the parent contact on Addison's application. He sent the exported pages to me after asking Paige first. Paige had answered him herself. Send them. That small decision told me the door between us had opened 1 inch. Now those pages sat on my laptop beside the Heartland rules. We did not go through every image. Paige chose 5. The cast iron rolls, the apple hand pies, the squash pastry, the pear and cranberry tart, and one cake I had never seen before that Paige immediately said was Addison's. "That one is hers," she said before I asked. The cake was a small chocolate layer cake with caramel frosting and a spray of sugared cranberries on top. "I helped smooth one side because she got mad at it," Paige said. "But that's her recipe." On the portfolio page, Addison's description called it an original holiday cake developed through 4 test bakes. Paige nodded slowly. "That's right, she did 4. There was no satisfaction in proving one item honest, but it changed the room anyway. The portfolio was not fabricated from top to bottom. Addison had real work in it. The squash pastry was listed differently. The description said Addison developed the concept and final presentation with guidance from Brittany. Paige frowned. "That's not completely wrong." I waited. Aunt Brittany came up with the filling. Addison helped with plating. "I fixed the dough. Are you listed?" Paige scanned the page. "No. The pear tart was worse." The portfolio called it a mother-daughter seasonal development and described Addison adjusting the fruit ratio and edge technique after early tests. Paige's jaw tightened. "She didn't do that. You're sure?" "Yes." She opened her notebook but stopped before turning it toward me. I kept my hands where they were. She found the September pages herself. The first version had Brittany's crust technique. Paige's notes showed 3 filling changes, a resting time adjustment, and the soggy edge fix she had described Sunday. Addison's initials appeared once near the end beside a note about garnish. The apple hand pies did not list Paige at all. Neither did the rolls. The rolls were presented as Addison's original holiday bread, developed under Brittany's mentorship. Paige stopped reading. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I saw something in her face harder than hurt. Not tears, not shame. Betrayal. She turned the screen toward me, as if I had somehow missed what was directly in front of us. She watched me do those. I knew she meant Addison now. I know she was around for some sessions. She ate version 3. That detail came out fast. "What?" Version 3. The one that spread too far. Addison was there after volleyball. She came in, ate 2, and said they tasted better than the ones Mom buys at the store. Paige's face changed at the word Mom. She had accidentally used Addison's point of view for Brittany, the way cousins sometimes did when they were little and constantly moving between 2 houses. She corrected herself. "Aunt Brittany's store ones." I did not point out the slip. "She knew I was making them," Paige said. "That is not necessarily the same as knowing what ended up in the application." Paige gave me a look so sharp, I almost admired it. "You really want her to be innocent?" "No." "Yes, you do. I want us not to decide something before we know it." She laughed at me. There it was. Not the portfolio. Thanksgiving. Addison's laugh had become part of the evidence in Paige's mind, because emotionally it belonged in the same pile. "She did," I said. "And now my food is in her application." "Yes." "So what exactly am I supposed to think?" I had no answer that would not sound like another adult telling a 16-year-old to be reasonable about something unreasonable, so I said, "Whatever you think, just leave room for one more fact." She hated that answer. I could tell because she closed the laptop. Then, to my surprise, she opened it again. "What did Uncle Aaron say?" "About what?" "About Addison." I had not told her the part Aaron mentioned in passing that Addison had been fighting with Brittany since Thanksgiving. He said they argued after we left. "About me?" "About whether the comment was really a joke." Paige looked down. "That doesn't mean anything." "No." Another careful answer. This time she did not snap at me. Instead, she opened her phone. Her thumb hovered over Addison's name. I watched her erase a message twice before she typed a third. "Can we talk?" She did not show me the rest because there was no rest. She sent only that. Addison answered 11 minutes later. Not now. Mom's here. Then, a second message. Tomorrow after school? Paige looked at me. What do you want to do? I asked. It was deliberate. I could have told Aaron. I could have arranged the call. I could have insisted on being in the room. 3 days earlier, I would have done all three and called it protecting her. Paige thought for a long moment. I want to ask her myself. Okay? And I don't want Uncle Aaron there. Okay? She hesitated. You can be here. I nodded once. That was enough. Wednesday afternoon, December 3rd, Paige came home 10 minutes earlier than usual. She changed out of her school sweatshirt, tied her hair back, then untied it again. I made coffee I did not need. At 4:30, Addison called. Paige put the phone on speaker and set it between us on the kitchen table. For a few seconds, all we heard was the dull sound of a car heater. Addison was sitting in her car in a shopping center parking lot because, as she put it, I am not having this conversation in my house. Paige started without greeting her. Did you know my stuff was in your Heartland portfolio? Addison went quiet. The silence lasted just long enough to feel like an answer. Then she said, If you're calling me a cheater, just say that. Paige's hand tightened around the edge of the table. I asked you a question. I know what you're asking. Then answer it. Addison exhaled loudly. I knew some of the things were things we worked on. We? Yes, Paige. We. You. Me. Mom. Sometimes Dad was there. You're acting like I broke into your house and stole a notebook. Paige flinched. I kept my mouth shut. That was the old instinct to step between them as soon as one sentence landed badly. This was Paige's conversation. She said, Did you know the roles were listed as yours? Another pause. I knew they were in there. That isn't what I asked. I don't remember exactly how Mom worded every page. The answer was plausible enough to keep suspicion alive and slippery enough to make Paige angrier. She pulled the laptop closer. It says you developed them under your mom's mentorship. Addison did not answer immediately. Then, I thought that meant the project. What project? All of it, the holiday stuff. That makes no sense. It did when Mom explained it. Paige laughed once without humor. Of course it did. The heater noise on Addison's end stopped. She must have turned off the car. I'm not doing this if you already decided I'm lying. I haven't decided anything. That was not entirely true, and both girls knew it. Addison said, You think I sat there watching you cook for a year so I could submit it under my name? Paige said nothing. The quiet was brutal. Addison's voice changed. Okay. Not angry now. Hurt. Then she said, You know I'm sorry about Thanksgiving, right? Paige stared at the phone. I laughed. Addison continued. I thought my mom was doing that thing she does where she says something mean, and then everybody's supposed to know she doesn't mean it. I laughed before I realized you weren't laughing. Paige's expression did not soften. That doesn't undo it. I know. I worked for 2 days. I know. She said you could have done it better. I know. This time Paige's voice rose. Could you? Addison went silent. Paige pulled up the roll page. Could you have done the rolls better? No. The answer came so quickly that I looked at the phone. Paige did too. Addison added, I can make rolls. I'm not saying I can't, but not those. Paige leaned toward the phone. What was wrong with version 2? I felt the question hit before Addison understood why it mattered. What? The rolls, version 2. What was wrong with them? I don't know. Version 3? Paige. What changed between version 3 and 4? I don't know. Paige's breathing went shallow, the same way it had when she saw the submission receipt. Addison sounded irritated now, but underneath it I heard something else. Confusion. I wasn't there for every test. You're listed as the person who developed them. I didn't write that sentence. Paige froze. Neither of us spoke. Addison seemed to realize what she had just said. I mean, Mom helped with the application. Obviously, she knows the food language better. Paige looked at me. I gave her nothing back except attention. She turned to the phone again. Did you write any of it? Yes. What? My cake. The plating section. Some of the descriptions. I filled out the personal stuff. And the rolls? I don't remember. Apple hand pies? I knew those were in there. Did you make them? I helped one time. When? I don't know, Paige. October? Paige opened her notebook. October 18th? I don't know. You weren't there October 18th. Addison's voice sharpened. Then, maybe another day. Paige flipped pages. There wasn't another day. Silence. Longer this time. Then Addison said, I thought you knew. Paige's face changed. Not enough for forgiveness. Enough for the first crack in certainty. Knew what? That we were doing this together. You and me? Yes. I didn't even know you applied to Heartland. I know that now. No, you don't get to say that like it explains anything. I'm not trying to explain it. Then what are you saying? Addison did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. Mom told me you knew she was putting the material together. She said we were building different parts of the same portfolio work and that your credit was being handled separately. Paige looked at me again. I could see the question in her face before she asked it. Separately how? I don't know. That's convenient. I know how it sounds. Do you? Yes. For the first time, Addison sounded scared. Not scared of Paige. Scared of the shape of the story she had been living inside. Paige did not let her off the hook. If you thought I knew, why didn't you ever talk to me about it? Addison exhaled. I did. Sort of. What does that mean? I asked Mom. That's not asking me. I know. Why didn't you ask me? I don't know. Because she said it was fine. Because I was busy. Because I wanted the application to be good. Pick one. There it was. Not innocence. Not conspiracy. A 17-year-old taking the answer that benefited her because an adult she trusted told her it was safe. That did not erase her responsibility. It did make the map less simple. Paige sat back. So you asked her? Yes. About me getting credit? Yes. When? More than once. Paige's eyes narrowed. Do you still have the messages? Addison did not answer. Then she said, I think so. The call ended 3 minutes later because Brittany pulled into the parking lot looking for her. Addison said she would check her messages and send whatever she found. Paige did not say thank you. She did not say she believed her. She only said, send the whole thing, don't crop it. After the call ended, the kitchen felt unnaturally quiet. Paige stared at the black screen of her phone. I waited. Finally, she said, she could still be lying. Yes. She could have made those messages today. Yes. She looked irritated with me again. You don't have to agree with every suspicious thing I say. I'm not agreeing. I'm saying we don't know yet. That almost earned me a smile. Almost. Her phone buzzed. One image came through from Addison. Then a second. Then a third. Paige opened the first screenshot. The timestamp was from October. Addison's message to Brittany sat at the top of the screen. Is Paige getting credit for these? Paige stopped breathing for a second. Below it was Brittany's reply. But Addison had sent only enough of the thread for us to see the first line. Paige looked at me. Then her phone buzzed again. The next screenshot finished the sentence Brittany had started months earlier. Yes, we're treating the holiday work as collaborative. Paige is getting plenty out of it, too. I'm helping her build her own material separately, so don't worry about making this a competition. Paige read it once. Then again. The third screenshot continued the same exchange. Addison had written, But if we use the rolls in the tart, shouldn't Paige's name be somewhere? Brittany's answer came 4 minutes later. We'll balance the credit when everything is organized. Right now, I need you to focus on your application. Paige isn't applying to Heartland, and she has her own portfolio to build. Nobody is taking anything from her. For several seconds, the only sound in our kitchen was the low hum of the refrigerator. I watched Paige's face without trying to name what passed across it. Anger was still there. So was hurt. But certainty had loosened. The screenshots had not cleared Addison. They had done something more useful. They had made her story possible. Addison had known Paige's work was being used. She had asked whether Paige was getting credit. Then she had accepted Brittany's answer, because the answer let her keep moving towards something she wanted. That was not the same as secretly planning to steal from her cousin. It was not nothing either. Paige enlarged the second screenshot until Brittany's words filled the screen. Nobody is taking anything from her, she read quietly. I did not respond. She looked at the timestamp. October 26th. That was before the final submission, before Thanksgiving, before Brittany had smiled across the table and said Addison could have made Paige's dinner better. Paige's thumb moved over the screen. She asked. Yes. She actually asked her. Yes. And then she never asked me. There was the part Addison still owned. I nodded once. Paige sat down. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a text instead of a screenshot. That's the whole thread I found. There might be more on my old phone. Mom just got home. I can call later. Paige stared at it. Then she typed, Did you believe her? The reply took almost a minute. At the time? Yes. Another pause. I wanted to. Paige put the phone face down. That answer stayed in the room. I wanted to. There was no clean way to judge a 17-year-old for that without admitting how many adults do the same thing. We believe the version that preserves the person we trust, the opportunity we want, or the life we do not want disrupted. Paige had done something similar with Brittany. So had I. The difference was that Addison's convenient belief had her name sitting on top of Paige's work. That made the cost uneven. About 40 minutes later, Addison called again. This time, she was in her bedroom with the door locked. She kept her voice low, and I could hear music somewhere beyond the wall, probably Brittany downstairs pretending the house was normal. Paige put the phone on speaker. Addison did not begin with an apology. She began with dates. That helped. She had gone through her texts and photo roll and found what she remembered contributing to the Heartland application. Her cake was hers. The plating sequence on the squash pastry was partly hers. She had tested garnish options on the pear tart one afternoon. She had made a maple cream Brittany paired with one of the hand pie versions later, though not the batch Paige had developed on October 18th. Then she got to the rolls. I thought those counted as ours, Addison said. Paige's eyes narrowed. How? Because Mom kept saying the whole holiday project was collaborative. That still doesn't tell me what you did. I shaped one batch. Which one? I don't know. The final one, I think. Paige reached for her notebook, then stopped herself. Instead, she asked, Was the dough already made? A long pause. Yes. Did you mix it? No. Did you change anything in it? No. Did you decide the rise time? No. Did you know there had been 3 versions before that? No. The word came smaller each time. Addison finally said, I thought the testing part was what you were doing for Mom, and then the final version was what we were doing together. Paige looked at me. I did not move. That sentence mattered, not because it proved a deliberate scheme. We were nowhere near that yet. It showed that the 2 girls had been standing at different points in the same process and calling the whole thing by different names. To Paige, the work was the testing the failures, changes, ratios, timing, the decisions that turned one version into the next. To Addison, Much of the work she saw began after those decisions had already been made. Paige opened the notebook to the rolls. "Okay," she said. "I'm going to ask you something, and I'm not trying to trap you." "You are absolutely trying to trap me." "I'm not. You sound like Aunt Morgan." For the first time in days, Paige gave me an offended look that almost made me laugh. I kept it inside. Paige turned back to the phone. "Version 1, she said. "What was wrong with it?" "I already told you I don't know the versions." "I know. Just tell me what you remember about the first time you ate them." Addison thought. "They were rolls." Paige shut her eyes. "Helpful. I'm serious. They were fine." "They were bricks." "Oh." Paige looked at the notebook. "Version 2? I don't remember being there." "You weren't. Then why are you asking me?" "Because the portfolio says you developed the recipe through repeated testing." Silence. Addison said. "Mom wrote that." Not defensive this time. Disturbed. Paige kept going. "Version 3 tasted right, but they spread too much. Version 4 fixed the structure. What changed?" "I don't know. Brown butter stayed?" "I don't know. Yeast amount?" "I don't know. Milk temperature?" "Paige, I don't know." The sharpness in Addison's voice broke on the last word. Paige stopped. So did I. This was no longer a confrontation. It was a reality test, and neither girl liked the result. Addison knew the final batch. She remembered brushing the tops, shaping a few pieces, moving them into the cast iron pan, and helping Brittany arrange the finished rolls for photographs. Paige knew why the batch existed in that form at all. That difference sat between them, without needing a speech. Addison whispered, "I really thought you knew." Paige did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was flatter. "You keep saying that." "Because I did. You thought I knew my work was in your application?" "Yes." "You thought I knew it was under your name?" "I thought Mom was handling the credit. She told me you were building your own portfolio from the same work." Paige's mouth tightened. "I didn't even have a portfolio. I know that now." "And you never asked to see it?" "No." "Why?" Addison took a breath. "Because I didn't want to find out there was a problem." That was the most honest thing she had said. Paige looked away from the phone. Addison continued before she could respond. "I'm not saying that makes it okay. I asked Mom because it felt weird. She gave me an answer that made it not weird. I took it. I wanted Heartland. I wanted something that was mine." Paige looked back. "Something that was yours." "I know how that sounds. You have no idea. I think I'm starting to." What Addison remembered about assembling the application was just as revealing for what she did not remember. She had not sat down one night and built the whole portfolio from an empty screen. Brittany had done most of the organizing in pieces. One evening, she asked Addison to choose between 2 photographs of the chocolate cake. Another time, she sent her 3 finished dish images and asked which looked strongest. Addison wrote the personal statement herself and drafted the short paragraph about why she liked cooking. Brittany cleaned up the language around the recipes because, as Addison put it, she said mine sounded like Instagram captions. "Did you ever see a page listing collaborators?" Paige asked. "I thought there was one." "You thought?" "I saw a draft with names in the notes. Yours was there." Paige's head lifted. "Where?" "I don't remember. Comments maybe. Or the planning sheet." "Was my name in the submitted pages?" Addison did not answer. Paige did not need her to. "The exported pages Aaron had sent us contained no Paige Hayes," Addison said. "That's why I asked Mom. I saw your pictures, and I knew you'd done a lot of the testing. She told me the credit section was being handled separately because you weren't the applicant." Paige rubbed both palms over her jeans. "Did it not occur to you that a credit section I never knew about was weird?" "Yes." The answer surprised us both. Addison continued. It did. Then Mom said you and she had already talked about your own portfolio, and you were always over there. You never acted mad. You kept sending her stuff. I thought if there was a problem, you would know before I did. Paige stared at the phone. That logic was unfair. It was also exactly the kind of logic that survives inside families, because everybody assumes somebody else had the conversation. I thought about my own texts with Brittany. I had known Paige was testing recipes. Aaron had known Paige spent long Saturdays there. Addison had known Paige's images were going into application materials. Paige had known some test versions later appeared on Brittany's menu. Each of us had held one corner. None of us had seen the whole sheet. Not yet. The conversation might have collapsed there if Addison had tried to defend herself one sentence longer. Instead, she did something I had not expected. She asked Paige to pick one more item from the submitted portfolio. Not the rolls, something neither of them had already argued about. Paige chose the pear and cranberry tart. She remembered Addison being present near the end. Addison remembered helping with garnish and photographs, so they reconstructed only that dish, not the whole year. Paige described the first version. Brittany's original crust technique, fruit filling too loose, bottom edge soggy. Addison remembered none of that. Paige described the second, less cranberry, longer rest, thinner fruit layer. Addison vaguely remembered tasting it after volleyball but could not say what had changed. The third version was where Addison's memory became clear. She remembered Brittany calling her into the kitchen after practice. The tart was already baked. Paige was scraping burnt syrup from one edge. Addison suggested candied orange peel instead of rosemary for the top, because the rosemary made it look like a Christmas tree that died. Paige remembered that too. She also remembered Addison arranging the orange pieces for the photograph. For the first time, they laughed. Only once, short and uncomfortable. But it mattered, because it came from a memory they both owned. Then Paige looked at the portfolio wording again. Mother-daughter, seasonal development. Addison adjusted the fruit ratio and edge technique after early tests. Addison went quiet. I didn't adjust the fruit ratio, she said. No. I didn't fix the edge. No. I did the orange. You did. And I helped plate it. Yes. Addison inhaled slowly. So why does it say I did the other parts? Neither girl asked me. They were no longer arguing about whether one of them was lying. They were comparing the versions of reality each had been given. Paige was still guarded and hurt, but her anger was no longer aimed straight across the phone line. Addison had accepted benefits without checking enough, and had let her mother's explanation do the moral work for her, so Paige was not ready to excuse that. Still, the evidence no longer fit the idea that Addison had knowingly watched Paige develop recipes just to steal them later. The harder question was now what Brittany had told each girl, and why the stories were different. Addison said, "There's something else I haven't told you." Paige stiffened again. I did too. Addison's voice dropped. I made the short list. For a second, Paige did not react. I did not understand either. Then Addison explained. Heartland had emailed finalists that afternoon. The first round portfolio had passed. She was one of 6 high school finalists invited to the final stage. There was a tuition scholarship attached to the fellowship, plus a paid summer apprenticeship with one of the program's partner kitchens. Paige's face went blank. Not jealous, hit, because the work was no longer sitting quietly in an application folder. It had already done something. It had moved Addison forward. When did you find out? Paige asked. Like an hour ago. And you weren't going to tell me? I'm telling you now. After I called you. Yes. Addison sounded ashamed. Then she added, There's more. She forwarded the email. Paige opened it while Addison stayed on the line. I leaned closer only when Paige tilted the screen toward me. The finalist instructions were brief. Each finalist had 72 hours to submit a creator process statement for one selected signature dish from the portfolio. The statement was supposed to explain how the dish changed from its earliest test to the final submitted version. What failed, what decisions the applicant made, what was learned, and which parts involved collaboration or mentorship. After that came a live practical on Sunday, December 7th. The date was 4 days away. The creator statement was due Saturday. The selected dish appeared in bold halfway down the email. Cast iron browned butter rolls. Paige stopped scrolling. Addison said nothing. I felt the story tighten around all three of us. Until that moment, time had been uncomfortable but generous. We could have waited a week before deciding what to do. Paige could have refused to discuss it. Addison could have argued with her mother. Aaron could have kept asking questions. Now the program itself had asked a question that required a factual answer. Not eventually. In 72 hours. Paige read the instructions again. You have to describe the failed versions. Yes. You have to say what you changed. Yes. And identify collaborators. Yes. Addison's voice had gone thin. Paige stared at the selected dish. What are you going to write? I don't know. The answer frightened me, because it was not evasive. She truly did not know. 3 choices sat underneath it. She could repeat the story already in the portfolio. She could withdraw. Or she could tell the truth before she fully understood what the truth was. Addison said, Mom is going to tell me what to write. Paige looked up sharply. Do not let her. It came out before she could soften it. Addison snapped back. I know. Then, quieter. I know. Her phone shifted on the other end. I heard a drawer open. I have copies of some of the portfolio pictures in a shared folder, she said. Mom made it when we started the application. If you want, I can send you the link. Paige hesitated. Send it. Addison did. A notification arrived almost immediately. Paige opened the folder. There were subfolders by dish, process photographs, cropped images, caption drafts, and several files with names like Final, Select, and Heartland. Use. We did not have time to inspect them. The page refreshed. One folder vanished. Paige frowned and tapped back, then another. Wait. Addison went silent. The shared folder refreshed again. The roles directory disappeared. Then the pear tart. Addison whispered. She knows. How? I don't know. Her voice rose. Maybe she saw me in the folder. Maybe she checked the sharing list. On Paige's screen, the link stopped loading. Assess the need. A second later, Addison said, She just texted me. Paige's face hardened. What did she say? Addison read it. Come downstairs now. I felt the old urge to seize the situation. Call Aaron, call Brittany, save every screen. Tell both girls exactly what to do. Instead, I looked at Paige. She was already taking screenshots of the access denied page and the finalist email. Her hands were steady. That was her choice. I let it remain hers. Addison said, I have to go. Paige leaned toward the phone. Do not delete our messages. I won't. Don't change anything in the statement yet. I won't. And if your mom tells you I'm trying to ruin this... She stopped herself. Addison waited. Paige let out a breath. Just don't answer her for me. There was a pause. Then Addison said, Okay. The call ended. For less than a minute, neither Paige nor I spoke. Then her phone buzzed once more. Not Brittany. Addison. A photograph of the finalist email zoomed in on the creator process prompt. Paige opened it. The sentence sat in the center of the screen. Describe how your original recipe changed from first test to final version. Under it, Addison had typed one message. I don't know the first version. Then another appeared. You do. The next morning, Paige left Addison's message unanswered. You do. Those 2 words were still on her screen when she put the phone face down beside her cereal bowl. I expected her to ask what she should tell Addison. She did not. At 16, silence can mean anger, fear, stubbornness, or simply thinking. I had learned that week not to fill every blank for her, so I drove her to school, watched her disappear through the side entrance, and went home. By 10:30, Brittany had changed the story. Not publicly. Not yet. She changed it in a message to Paige. Paige forwarded me a screenshot during lunch with no comment. Brittany wrote that the Heartland portfolio was being misunderstood. Paige had not created Addison's work, she said. Brittany had supplied ingredients, prompts, techniques, equipment, feedback, and a real business context in which Paige could learn. Paige had tested ideas under her direction. Addison had participated in final development and presentation. Calling that theft was turning mentorship into something ugly because Morgan was angry about Thanksgiving. The message was good. That was what made it dangerous. If Brittany had claimed Paige never touched the rolls, we had photographs, timestamps, and a notebook full of corrections. If she had said Addison invented every dish alone, Addison herself no longer believed that. Instead, Brittany used facts. She had bought ingredients. She had taught techniques. She had brought starting ideas into the kitchen. She had shown Paige the original enriched dough that eventually became the cast iron rolls. She had a business and customers and adult staff who gave the testing a context Paige could not have created alone at 16. Every sentence was true enough to lean on. The question was what those truths were being asked to carry. I did not reply to Paige's screenshot. I waited until she came home. She walked in after 4 with cold reddened cheeks, dropped her backpack beside the stairs, and spent 5 minutes complaining about a chemistry lab. Then she opened the refrigerator and said, "She's not completely wrong. I was slicing an apple. I put the knife down." "No," I said. Paige looked at me quickly. She had expected resistance. "She did teach you," I said. "She did bring ideas. She did buy ingredients. And the first roll dough was hers. Yes. She showed me how to fix the tart shell. Yes. So, how am I supposed to say those things are mine?" A week earlier, I would have tried to solve the sentence for her. Now I understood that the uncertainty mattered. "I don't think you have to call all of it yours," I said. "You have to be able to say what you actually did. That sounds easy when you say it. It isn't." She gave me the problem sometimes. Then I figured it out. What if that still counts as me executing her idea? There was Brittany's new word. Executing, not creating, not developing. A 16-year-old could spend 4 Saturdays changing hydration, temperature, fat, proof time, and structure, and 1 word could make all of that sound like following instructions. But if I attacked the word, Paige would hear me attacking months she had loved. "What do you think?" I asked. She frowned. I think sometimes she told me exactly what to do. Sometimes she didn't. Sometimes she had the idea, and I fixed it. And sometimes I had the idea. I nodded. I don't know what that makes her. She was not talking about authorship anymore. "You don't have to decide that today." That evening, Brittany called her. Paige came into my office with the phone ringing in her hand. "Aunt Brittany." I did not tell her to answer or ignore it. On the 4th ring, Paige accepted the call and walked into the living room. She did not put it on speaker. I stayed at my desk. I heard only her side. "Yes, I know." "No, I didn't say that." Then, after a long silence, "I'm not talking about Mom." That made me look up. Another silence. Then, "I remember." When the call ended, Paige stayed by the front window until she was ready to come to me. She said, "You're turning this into theft because you hate her now." "What did you say?" "That I'm the one asking." She sat on the arm of the chair across from me. She reminded me about the first time I made laminated dough. I kept tearing it. She told me to put everything in the refrigerator, walk away, then showed me how to roll from the center instead of smashing the edges. It worked. She looked almost embarrassed to remember it. That happened, I said. You're not going to tell me she only did it so I'd trust her. No. Because it feels like everybody wants me to go backward and make every good thing fake, so the bad thing makes sense. I'm not asking you to do that. For almost a year, Brittany had occupied a place in Paige's life. I had been grateful for an adult who took her seriously in the one room where Paige felt larger instead of smaller. You could not cut that memory out cleanly because the relationship around it had changed. Paige rubbed her thumb over the seam of her jeans. She said if she gave me a starting formula and I worked on it, that doesn't make the final recipe mine. She also said Addison helped more than I remember. There it was. Not a denial. A shift in memory. A contested history. Do you remember Addison helping more? Not with the roles. Then that's what you know right now. What if I forgot? You might have forgotten some things. That doesn't make Brittany's version right. It means memory is messy. That's why dates and pictures matter. Paige was quiet. Then she said, "The folder is gone." And she changed captions. She pulled out her phone. 2 older business posts were still online, but the wording had changed. A pear-tart caption that had once said seasonal test with my girls now read Addison refining one of our fall favorites. Another post, showing the squash pastries, had been edited to mention mother-daughter development. Paige had screenshots from before. The photographs had not changed. The words around them had. That frightened me more than a loud denial would have. Brittany understood the fight was not only over what happened, it was over what version of what happened would still be visible later. The changed captions also forced a practical decision. Paige had been assuming she and Addison could simply attach the old shared folder to anything they sent Heartland and let the files speak for themselves. That was no longer possible. What they had saved before access closed mattered. What they had not saved might now exist only in Brittany's account, under wording she controlled. Paige scrolled through her own photo roll and stopped at a picture of Brittany standing beside her at the counter in September. Brittany's hand was on the rolling pin, Paige's on the dough. Both of them were laughing at something outside the frame. "This is what I mean," Paige said. "How am I supposed to look at this and say she wasn't my mentor?" "You shouldn't." She looked up. I said, "A picture can show she taught you and still not answer who made which decisions later." Paige studied it again. "She keeps making it sound like I have to choose one story." "What two?" "That she taught me, or that she used my work." I thought about that before answering. Maybe both can be true. She did not thank me for the insight. She simply saved the photograph into a folder on her own phone and labeled it September Brittany Teaching Dough Technique. That was more important. For the first time, she was preserving something that helped Brittany's side too. Not because she trusted Brittany again. Because Paige had begun to understand that if she wanted the truth, she could not edit the past into something cleaner than it had been. The next call came from Aaron. He asked if Paige was home. I said yes, but did not hand her the phone. "What is it?" "I found something." Aaron had spent the afternoon going through old messages on his own phone. He found a thread from September. After one Saturday, when he came home and found Paige asleep on their couch, while Brittany was still photographing food in the kitchen. He had asked Brittany how much Paige was doing for the business. Brittany said Paige was not working orders. She was learning. Then Aaron had asked something more specific. "Is she getting anything for all this besides practice? Credit? Something she can use later?" Brittany's reply was still there. "Of course. I'm mentoring her. She'll have a reference from me and her own portfolio material when she's ready. This is good for both girls." I sat very still. The words did not prove who invented the roles. They proved Aaron had noticed the amount of development work months before Thanksgiving and had asked whether Paige would receive credit or portfolio value. More importantly, Brittany's answer matched the belief Paige, Aaron, and I had all carried into Thanksgiving, her own portfolio material. Paige had announced on Thanksgiving that she planned to organize her own portfolio because, as far as we knew, no portfolio for her existed. "Have you sent this to Brittany?" I asked. "No." "Does she know you found it?" A pause. "She knows I'm looking through my own messages." "Aaron," he exhaled. "She told me to stop giving you ammunition." Paige appeared in the hallway. "Is it about me?" Aaron heard her. "Yes." She came in. I put him on speaker only after she nodded. He read the September exchange aloud. Paige barely moved until he reached her own portfolio material. Her eyes closed for half a second. Aaron said, "I asked because I knew you were doing a lot. I should have asked you too." "Yes," Paige said. He accepted it. Then he said, "Brittany says the message proves the opposite of what Morgan thinks. She says she intended to help you build something later." Paige stared at the phone. "Did she? I haven't found anything." "Did she ever show you one?" "No." "Did she ever ask me for a bio, a list of my work, anything?" "No." Aaron's breathing crackled through the speaker. Then he made the choice he had been avoiding since Thanksgiving. "I'm sending you the screenshots." Paige did not react. "And I'm telling Brittany I sent them." That changed something inside his house. Until then, Aaron had been questioning his wife, while keeping open the possibility that he could later say he had never taken sides. Sharing a message Brittany had specifically told him not to use ended that position. "You sure?" I asked. "No," he said. "I'm doing it anyway." The screenshots arrived before the call ended. 3 minutes later, Brittany walked into the room with him. We heard her say his name. Aaron said, "I sent it." A beat of silence. Then the call ended. There was nothing satisfying about watching a marriage fracture around information that should have been ordinary. Aaron was no longer neutral, and Brittany knew it. Later, after Aaron sent the screenshots, he texted once from his driveway. "She says I betrayed her." I stared at the sentence, then showed Paige, only because the message concerned the evidence Aaron had chosen to share. Paige read it and handed the phone back. "Did he?" It was not a rhetorical question. "He broke confidence with his wife," I said. "He also gave you a message about you that she told him to keep from us." Paige frowned. "So both?" "Probably." She leaned back in her chair. "I hate that every answer is both." "So do I." But that was the shape of the story now. The closer we got to what happened, the less useful simple labels became. By Thursday night, more things began disappearing. A business post from September was gone entirely. A photograph Paige remembered Brittany taking of her notebook no longer appeared in the public album where she had once seen it. Addison texted that her access to the application planning folder had been revoked too. No one had enough access anymore to believe the whole thing could be solved by opening Brittany's files. That plan was dead. Paige had her notebook and dated photos. Addison had her messages and some saved images. Aaron had his text history and the household submission receipt. I had my messages with Brittany and screenshots Paige had chosen to save. Pieces. Not a master file. Not a confession. Pieces. The deadline made that mess dangerous. Addison had 72 hours to submit a creator process statement, but Paige was not going to solve that by supplying a clean narrative Brittany could reuse. Addison was not going to solve it by pretending she remembered failed versions she had never seen. And I could not solve it by calling Heartland and speaking over both girls. Something else had to change. By then, gathering evidence was no longer the whole task. The girls needed to decide what truth they were willing to stand behind before the clock ran out. That night, Paige sat at the kitchen table with the creator process prompt open on her phone. The deadline had rolled under 48 hours. Addison had started a draft, but refused to send Paige the wording because she did not want Paige to become her ghostwriter. Paige tapped the black notebook with one finger. What if I just tell her the version history? Do you want to? I don't know. If you tell her, what is she going to do with it? That's the problem. The information Addison needed to answer Heartland's question was sitting under Paige's hand. That gave Paige power. It also made her miserable. What do you want to do? I asked. She gave me a tired look. You've asked me that like 5 times this week. I know. It's annoying. I know. That earned the smallest breath of a laugh. Then she became serious. I don't want to write Addison's statement. I don't want her to lie. I don't want to call Heartland tonight. And I don't want you calling Aunt Brittany. I nodded. What do you want me to do? Paige looked down at the notebook. Help me keep track of what we actually have. Not what we think she meant. Just what we have. That was different from Sunday. She was not handing me the notebook so I could take over. She was defining the job. So we made one list. Paige's notebook and dated photos. Addison's message chain asking about credit. Aaron's September text promising reference and portfolio material. The Heartland submission receipt. The exported pages. Before and after screenshots of changed captions. The access denied screen. Beside each item, Paige wrote what it established and what it did not. The notebook showed her process. It did not prove every idea began with her. Addison's messages showed she questioned credit. They did not erase that she accepted Brittany's answer, because she wanted Heartland. Aaron's message showed Brittany promised Paige portfolio benefit. It did not prove Brittany had never intended to provide it later. The list calmed Paige, because it did not demand a conclusion. It only kept anyone from replacing uncertainty with a convenient story. At 9:15, Aaron sent one more message. Not about Heartland, about the catering business. Brittany had booked additional hours at the licensed shared commercial kitchen for Friday. She had hired an experienced adult baking contractor to work with the existing staff and standardize several holiday recipes, including the rolls and squash pastries. Aaron wrote that Brittany had told him she was tired of everyone acting as if the business depended on a 16-year-old. Paige read that twice. Her face went red, then pale. Good, she said, too quickly. I did not challenge it. If Brittany could reproduce every recipe without Paige, that would not change what happened with the portfolio. If she could not, it would not automatically prove ownership. But the replacement attempt showed Brittany's plan. She was not waiting to be understood. She was rebuilding control. Records could be changed. Access could be closed. A contractor could be hired. The story could shift from Paige, developed this, to Paige practiced this. And if the adult kitchen reproduced the menu, Brittany could point to finished food and say, Paige's knowledge had never been essential. Paige looked at the list. She's trying to make it look like I was just helping. She's making sure she has another explanation available. Paige nodded. At 10:02, Addison texted. Mom says Dad sent you his messages. Paige answered. He did. A minute later, she is furious. Paige looked at me. Do you want to answer? No. She put the phone away. The next morning, Friday, the creator statement deadline was less than 2 days away. Paige went to school. I went to work. Brittany went to the shared kitchen with an adult contractor and a plan to prove the business could keep moving without the person she had spent months texting that she needed. For most of the day, nothing happened. Then, at 3:52, Paige's phone lit up while she sat in the passenger seat of my car after school. Brittany, Paige stared at the preview. I did not ask to see it. She opened the message herself. Her eyes moved once across the screen, then again. What? I asked. She turned the phone toward me. Before you ruin Addison's chance, let me show you a way nobody has to lose. Paige did not answer Brittany's message that night. She read it twice, locked her phone, and put it face down on the kitchen table. Before you ruin Addison's chance, Let me show you a way nobody has to lose. It was a good sentence. That was what bothered me. If Brittany had written something cruel or defensive, Paige could have dismissed it. If she had blamed me again, Paige probably would have ignored her. Instead, she had found the exact pressure point that still hurt. Addison had not built the lie alone, and Paige did not want telling the truth to become the thing that destroyed her cousin's future. I did not tell Paige what I thought. That was becoming a discipline. Friday passed under the weight of the Heartland deadline. I kept my promise not to turn Paige's problem into a project of my own. At 3:52, Paige came through the front door and placed her phone beside my laptop. She sent the actual offer. I looked at Paige before I looked at the screen. Do you want me to read it? Yes. Brittany had not sent a speech. She had sent bullet points. Withdraw the rolls and the apple hand pies from Addison's finalist materials. Keep the remaining portfolio intact. Add a general acknowledgement that Paige contributed to holiday testing. After the fellowship decision, Brittany would help Paige organize her own portfolio, write a recommendation, and pay her for future recipe development work if Paige wanted to continue. Addison would keep her finalist spot. At the bottom, Brittany had written, "This fixes what needs fixing without punishing Addison for something she didn't understand." I read it again. Then I said, "What do you think?" Paige was still standing, backpack on one shoulder. "I think it's not terrible." That surprised me only because I had been expecting anger. She sat across from me. "She's offering to remove the two worst ones." "Yes." "And she'd put something in there about me." "Yes." "And Addison could still go Sunday." "Yes." Paige rubbed the side of her thumb along the edge of her phone. "If she'd done that, before she submitted it, we probably wouldn't even be here." The sentence landed because it was true. A compromise can be reasonable and still arrive too late. I asked Paige whether Addison had seen it. She got almost the same message. Almost? Her version says Mom can correct this without making the program think the whole application is fake. The difference was in the framing, not in an outright lie. Paige picked up her phone. "Addison wants to go through the rest of the portfolio with me before we answer." I nodded. "Then do that." She looked at me for a second, as if waiting for the condition that used to follow my permission. None came. By 5, Addison was at our house. Aaron dropped her off but did not come inside. I saw his car idle at the curb long enough for Addison to close the front door behind her, then pull away. No Brittany. Addison looked exhausted. She looked 17-year-old exhausted. Hair tied badly, school hoodie wrinkled, backpack dragging one shoulder lower. Paige had already cleared half the kitchen table. The black notebook sat on her side. Addison brought printed copies of the submitted portfolio pages Aaron had saved through the household account before access tightened. I made sandwiches, put them on a plate, and moved to the far end of the counter. The girls did not reconstruct the whole application. They started with what Brittany wanted to leave in. That distinction mattered. If the deal was supposed to fix the problem, then the remaining pages had to survive their own test. The chocolate cake survived immediately. Addison had developed it. Paige had helped smooth frosting once and tasted one test version. Brittany had offered a caramel technique. The portfolio described Addison's 4 test bakes accurately enough. They marked it Addison. The squash pastry took longer. Brittany had created the roasted squash filling. Paige had changed the dough after repeated leaking. Addison had shaped part of the final batch and developed the garnish and plating. They marked it collaborative, not equal. Collaborative. The pear and cranberry tart was harder. Addison read the submitted description again, then looked at Paige's notebook. "Mom's offer keeps this one." Paige nodded. The portfolio said Addison had adjusted fruit ratios and corrected the crust edge through early testing. Both girls now knew she had not. Addison had entered near the end. She had contributed garnish and presentation. Real work. Just not the work the sentence credited to her. If we remove the rolls and hand pies, Paige said, this is still wrong. Addison pressed her lips together. Yeah, they moved to a maple shortbread item. This one was genuinely messy. Brittany had started the flavor combination. Paige had tested texture changes one Saturday. Addison had developed the final glaze later. The submitted description leaned too heavily toward Addison, but not absurdly so. They marked it needs correction. Then a citrus tart. Brittany's original concept. Paige's curd ratio adjustment. Addison's finish and photography. Collaborative again. By 6:30, the table no longer looked like a fight between two cousins. It looked like a map. Addison's. Collaborative. Paige core development. Brittany concept. Misstated. Accurate. Needs correction. The categories were not satisfying. They were useful. Paige leaned back and stared at the pages. If she had just written it like this? Addison finished the thought. I still could have applied. Neither of them said anything after that. The problem had never been that Addison had touched no food. The problem was that the record had been arranged to make her contribution look larger and Paige's look smaller. Brittany's offer did not fix that. It reduced the number of obvious examples. Addison picked up her phone. I'm asking her about the tart. Paige said, ask about the wording, not me. Addison typed. Why is the pear tart staying if the application says I adjusted the filling and edge? I didn't. Brittany answered 6 minutes later. Because you participated in the project and the language can be clarified as part of the mentorship context, Addison showed us. Paige shook her head once. That still doesn't answer it. A second message arrived. Stop treating every sentence like a courtroom exhibit. Programs understand that mentorship is collaborative. I watched Paige's face tighten. 3 days earlier, that sentence might have pushed Paige back into doubt. Now she could compare an honestly collaborative dish with a misdescribed one. Complexity no longer meant everything was unknowable. Addison typed again. What exactly do you want Paige to say? This time Brittany did not answer quickly. The kitchen got quieter while we waited. At 7:03, Addison's phone buzzed. She opened the message and did not speak. Paige noticed first. What? Addison turned the phone around. Brittany had written a short paragraph. If Paige is willing to confirm that the remaining portfolio work was primarily developed by Addison under my mentorship, with Paige contributing as a testing assistant on selected items, I can amend the 2 disputed entries and explain the rest as normal collaborative development. That should preserve the finalist status while still acknowledging Paige's help. Nobody at the table moved. There was the hidden cost. A sentence. Brittany did not merely want Paige to accept less credit. She wanted Paige to certify the version that made less credit look accurate. I watched my daughter read the paragraph. Testing assistant. For nearly a year, Brittany had called her talented, intuitive, gifted, essential. Now that authorship mattered, the same work had become assistance. Paige looked at Addison. Did Heartland ask for this? Addison shook her head. No. Did they say my confirmation would keep you in? No. Then this is your mom's idea. Yes. I saw relief and fear cross Addison's face together. Relief because the program had not forced the choice. Fear because her mother had. Paige opened the portfolio again and pointed to the pear tart. If I say the remaining work was primarily yours, I'm saying this sentence is basically true. Addison stared at it. It isn't. The shortbread? I did more on that. You did. The squash pastry? We both did parts. Yes. Paige touched the page with the rolls even though Brittany had offered to remove them. And these? Addison looked down. Yours. The word sat there without qualification. I had wanted Paige to hear that for days. When she finally did, it did not make her look victorious. It made her tired. Addison whispered, I don't want you to lie for me. Paige looked at her. I don't want you to lose everything because your mom lied. I might anyway. That's not the same thing. No. They had arrived at the real decision, not whether Brittany was wrong. Whether Paige was willing to make one wrong thing easier to preserve, because the consequences of correcting it would fall on somebody she did not hate. At 7:40, Aaron called me. I stepped into the living room so the girls could keep talking. His voice was low. Did Brittany send you the deal? She sent it to Paige. What do they think? They're still working through it. He was quiet. Then he said, There's something you should know. I waited. The adult contractor Brittany had brought into the shared commercial kitchen had tried to reproduce one of the holiday brunch items that depended on a process Paige had developed earlier in the fall. A laminated savory pastry built from one of the same testing routines Paige had helped troubleshoot. The contractor was experienced. This was not proof nobody else could cook. The problem was that Brittany's written version of the process skipped the tiny corrections Paige had made over several tests: rest time, temperature adjustment, when to chill the filling before shaping. The contractor could produce the pastry, but not consistently enough for the order Brittany had already accepted. Half the test batch leaked. The second batch held better but baked unevenly. Brittany had called the client and reduced the quantity, refunded part of the deposit, and replaced one item on the menu. How much? I asked. A few hundred on this order. Not disaster, a real bruise, Aaron continued. She's furious because she keeps saying Paige knows what's missing. I looked toward the kitchen. Paige and Addison were bent over the portfolio, two teenagers sorting credit into columns because an adult had failed to do it honestly the first time. What did you tell her? That Paige isn't fixing business recipes right now. And she said I was choosing you. I closed my eyes. What did you say? That I was choosing not to call a 16-year-old and ask her to solve a problem we created. That did not redeem him, but it did draw a boundary. Back in the kitchen, I gave Paige Aaron's exact version. One reduced order, one partial refund, one process that could be made but not consistently. Paige's first reaction was instinctive. What did they do wrong? She caught herself before I answered. That moment told me more than a speech could have. The part of her that loved solving kitchen problems had not disappeared. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Addison looked at her. You know what's missing, don't you? Paige stared at the table. Probably. Are you going to tell her? Paige's eyes lifted. I don't know. She was separating two questions Brittany had spent months blending together. Can I help? Should I? By Friday night, Brittany's compromise had become less attractive, not because Paige wanted revenge, but because the more carefully the girls tested it, the more they saw what it required them to pretend. They slept on it. Saturday morning, December 6th, the deadline day, Addison came back at 10. Aaron walked her to the porch but did not enter. Brittany did not come. The creator process statement was due that evening. Paige had decided one thing overnight. She was not going to write Addison's statement for her. That line mattered. She would help identify what had actually happened. Addison would decide how to describe her own part. We used a blank document on my laptop, but Paige sat in front of it, not me. She created 3 columns. Dish. Actual contribution. Submitted description. The chocolate cake went first. Addison developed recipe through 4 tests. Brittany advised caramel technique. Paige minor frosting help. Accurate. Then squash pastry. Brittany concept. Filling. Paige dough correction and fold changes. Addison garnish. Shaping on final stage. Plating. Submitted description. Incomplete. Paige omitted. Pear tart. Brittany original crust technique. Paige fruit ratio. Rest time and soggy edge correction through early tests. Addison garnish and final presentation. Submitted description materially inaccurate. Maple shortbread. Brittany flavor concept. Page texture test. Addison final glaze. Needs collaborative disclosure. Roles. Page iterative development through 4 versions. Brittany initial technique and pan suggestion. Addison shaped part of final batch and helped presentation. Submitted description materially inaccurate. Apple hand pies. Page core development of filling, crust handling, and venting. Brittany present during testing. Addison later contributed maple cream to a separate variation. Submitted description materially inaccurate. No accusations, just what each person did. At noon, Addison read the list from top to bottom. "I hate this," Paige said. "Which part?" "All of it." "That's not helpful." "I know." Addison pointed to her cake. "That's actually mine." "Yes." "And the squash thing is partly mine." "Yes." "And the tart says I did stuff I didn't." "Yes." Her finger stopped there. "If I send this, they might pull me." Paige did not answer. Addison looked at her cousin. "I'm not asking you to fix that." Paige's face softened by 1 degree. "I know." At 12:18, Brittany called Paige. Paige let it ring. A minute later, a text arrived. "Please don't turn in anything until you talk to me." Paige did not answer. Then another. "You are 16. You do not understand how these programs work." Paige's mouth tightened. That sentence landed differently than it would have a week earlier. Brittany had spent months telling her she had a professional palate, professional instincts, professional discipline, whenever those qualities were useful. Now, the moment Paige used judgment against Brittany's interests, 16 became the most important fact about her. A third message arrived. "I can have the amendment ready in an hour. You will get credit." Addison keeps her place. We fix the business side separately. Everybody walks away with something. Paige read it, then she looked at the chart. "What would I get?" I thought she was asking me. She was not. She was asking the sentence. Credit later. A recommendation later. Possible paid work later. A future portfolio Brittany would help organize later. Every promise still depended on the person who had decided when Paige's name should disappear. Paige's phone buzzed again. Brittany had sent the proposed confirmation language 1 more time. Primarily developed by Addison under Brittany's mentorship, with Paige contributing as a testing assistant on selected items. Paige copied the sentence into the blank document under the chart. Then she highlighted, "Primarily developed by Addison." "Is that true for the remaining dishes?" Addison shook her head. "No." Paige highlighted, "Testing assistant." "Is that true?" Addison hesitated. "For some parts." "For the whole thing?" "No." Paige deleted the proposed statement. 1 key. Gone. At 2, the girls drafted the clarification. It was short. They did not accuse Brittany of intentionally falsifying anything. They did not speculate about motive. They identified the submitted portfolio, stated that several entries did not accurately reflect the development roles, and attached the contribution chart. Addison wrote that she was the applicant and wanted the record corrected. Paige wrote that she was a collaborator whose role had not been disclosed accurately. For the roles, she summarized the 4-version development without attaching her whole notebook. For the tart, they listed who did what. For the cake, they explicitly said the original submission was accurate. That detail mattered to Paige. "If we're correcting it, we correct all of it," she said. "Not just the parts that made Brittany look bad." By 4:30, the email was ready. The deadline was still hours away. Nobody rushed. That surprised me. For 10 days, everything had felt like people grabbing for the next fact before somebody else could change it. Now the most irreversible action in the story so far sat inside a blue send button, and Paige took her time. She reread every sentence. Addison reread them too. I sat across from them and did not touch the laptop. At one point, Paige looked at me. "What would you do?" A week earlier, I would have answered immediately. Now I understood the danger in that. "I can tell you what I think," She waited. I think the chart is fair. I think you left out anything you can't support. And I think whether you send it is your decision. She looked almost disappointed. You're not going to tell me? No. Why? Because you're the one who has to live with what happens after. Addison looked down at her hands. Paige looked back at the screen. At 4:47, Brittany called again. Paige declined it. Then Aaron texted Addison. Whatever you decide, make it true. Addison showed Paige. No one commented on it. At 4:51, Paige moved the cursor over send. She stopped, not because she had changed her mind, because she looked at Addison one last time. You understand this could knock you out? Yes. You still want your name on it? Addison's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Yes. Paige nodded. Then she pressed send. The message disappeared from the draft window. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the sent confirmation appeared, just a timestamp. 4:50, 1 p.m., Saturday, December 6th. Paige sat very still. Addison released a breath that sounded as if she had been holding it since Wednesday. I looked at the empty draft window and understood what had changed. Until that moment, Brittany could still tell herself this was a family fight. A Thanksgiving overreaction. A mother angry about a joke. Two teenagers confused about collaboration. Now the girls had put their own names under a factual account and sent it outside the family. Whatever happened next would have to answer that record. And there was no taking it back. For the first 20 minutes, after Paige pressed send, nothing changed. That was almost insulting. The kitchen still smelled faintly of coffee and toasted bread. Addison's backpack was still slumped against one chair. Paige's black notebook still sat open beside the laptop. Outside, the December light had already begun turning blue behind the bare trees. At 5:13, Addison's phone chimed. Heartland had acknowledged receipt of the clarification. The message was short. They had received new information concerning authorship and collaboration in the submitted portfolio. Because the issue affected finalist materials, Addison's award status would be placed on hold while the program reviewed provenance. She remained provisionally eligible for the scheduled Sunday practical, which would continue because live execution and process explanation were part of the final verification stage. Addison read the email twice and sat down. So I'm still going tomorrow. For now, Paige said. Addison nodded, but she did not look relieved. The practical had stopped being a prize waiting at the end of an application. Now it was a room she might walk into, while the people judging her already knew the story attached to her portfolio was disputed. At 5:31, another message arrived. This one asked for supporting material only where available. Dated process photographs, contemporaneous notes, collaborator communications, or other information that could help establish development roles. It also said the program would contact the parent or mentor listed on the original submission for a response. Addison stared at the last sentence. They're going to ask Mom. Paige looked at the laptop. They should. That was easy to say when Brittany was not in the room. 47 minutes later, Erin texted me that she had received the request. By 6:30, her answer existed. I did not see the full response that night. Erin did not have access to it, and Addison refused to ask her mother for a copy. But Brittany told Erin enough during the argument that followed for us to understand the position she had taken. Paige had been a mentee. A talented mentee, Brittany emphasized, but still a mentee. Brittany had provided the recipe's starting concepts, ingredients, equipment, professional context, instruction, and feedback. Paige had tested variations as part of her learning. Addison had participated in later development and presentation. Any failure to name Paige more explicitly was an administrative credit issue, not evidence that Addison's portfolio represented someone else's work. Then Brittany added the sentence I had expected. The dispute had begun only after Thanksgiving, when I had become angry over a family joke. Aaron did not dramatize it when he told me. She said, "You're retaliating." I looked at Paige before answering. Her face did not change. Addison's did. "That's not why I sent it," she said. Aaron's voice came through my speaker. I told her that. "What did she say?" "That you're 17 and scared because Morgan and Paige are making this bigger than it is." Addison closed her eyes. Brittany's version could sound plausible to somebody outside our family because it contained real mentorship, real collaboration, and a convenient motive for me. Thanksgiving. Paige opened her notebook. "Fine," she said. The word came out sharper than I expected. She flipped to the rolls, then to the tart, then back again. "I have dates." "You do," I said. "I have every version. For some dishes. I have pictures." "Yes." "So why are we acting like nobody can tell?" "Because a notebook is not a judge." I did not say it that way. Instead, I pulled my chair closer, only when she looked at me. "Your notebook proves what you wrote down while you were working," I said. "That matters. It doesn't automatically prove what Brittany told Addison, or what Brittany intended, or whose original idea started every dish." Paige's jaw tightened. "I know whose idea started the rolls. The first dough came from Brittany. I know. And then you changed it. I know." For days, the notebook had felt like solid ground. Now Paige had to face its limit. It could show process, not read minds. The Heartland request forced us to stop asking, "Who has the better story?" and ask something harder. What could each piece actually establish? Addison left just after 7 because Aaron was waiting outside. Before she went, Paige gave her copies of 3 pages she had chosen herself. The roll timeline, the pear tart development notes, and the squash pastry page, showing Brittany's original filling idea beside Paige's dough corrections. Not the whole notebook. 3 pages. "That's enough for tonight," Paige said. At the door, Addison admitted she had thought about withdrawing. Paige did not tell her what to do. Addison left without either girl turning the moment back into a competition. At 8:18, Paige came back down, carrying her notebook, her phone, and 3 printed portfolio pages. "Can we try something?" I closed my laptop. "What?" "Not who made what." That surprised me. She spread the papers across the table. The first page was the rolls. She wrote 4 dates from her notebook down the left side of a sheet of paper. Beside them, she added what she remembered. September 27th, first enriched dough with Brittany. October 4th, second test at our house. October 11th, third test, structure wrong. October 24th, final cast iron version photographed at Brittany's. Then she opened her messages. Not all of them. Only the threads connected to those dates. Before the early tests, Brittany's messages were to Paige. "Try reducing the yeast. Send me a picture when it cools. Do the second rise by feel this time. Tell me what happens if you keep the browned butter." The language was about problems, questions, changes, uncertainty. Then Paige scrolled forward to the day the final version worked. There were photographs of the shaped rolls in the cast iron pan. A little later, Addison had a photo from the same kitchen. Not mixing, not measuring. Her hands were brushing cream over the tops while Brittany photographed from the side. Paige stared at the timestamps. Addison came after volleyball. I remembered that from their conversation. Paige opened a message Addison had already shown us earlier in the week. Brittany had texted her that afternoon asking if she wanted to come help finish the holiday bread photos. Paige put the 2 phones side by side. One message to her before the recipe worked, one message to Addison after it did. "Do the tart," I said. Paige did. The pear and cranberry tart had the same shape. Early September messages to Paige were about soggy edges, fruit ratios, resting time, and whether the filling should cool before assembly. Later, after the third version finally held, Addison remembered being called in after volleyball. Her contribution began with candied orange peel, garnish, final plating, and photographs. The squash pastry was less neat because Brittany had created the filling herself. Still, the sequence repeated. Brittany gave Paige the leaking pastry problem. Paige changed dough and fold. After it became stable enough to photograph, Addison appeared in the record more often, shaping final pieces, arranging garnish, deciding presentation. The apple hand pies were even clearer. Paige's October 18th notes showed the entire core development session. Addison's later message thread began with a variation using maple cream. Different stage, different question, different version of the same project. By 9:30, we had only 4 dishes on the table. That was enough. Paige sat back. She didn't just tell us different things. I waited. She gave us different parts. The problem was not that the girls entered at different stages. It was what each had been told those stages meant. Paige had believed she was developing work with Brittany and building experience she could later use as her own material. Addison had believed Paige's testing was one part of a broad collaborative holiday project, and that the final development she saw belonged to the project she and Brittany were assembling for Heartland. Brittany was the only person who had access to both stories from beginning to end. Paige looked at me. "Do you think she did that on purpose?" "I think the pattern is real," I said. "That isn't what I asked." "I know." She waited. I looked at the messages again. The early problem-solving was almost always routed privately to Paige. The later presentation choices were often routed privately to Addison. When Addison asked about Paige's credit, Brittany told her it was being handled separately. When Aaron asked what Paige was getting from all the work, Brittany told him Paige would have her own portfolio material. When Paige asked what the photographs were for, Brittany talked about business content, practice, or saving things for later. Every explanation required the listener not to compare notes with the next person. "I think," I said slowly, "she benefited from you two not seeing the whole chain." Paige's eyes stayed on me. And after Addison asked about credit? That was the part I could not dismiss as accident. Brittany had been warned. Addison had asked directly. Instead of bringing the girls together and saying, "Here's how I'm crediting this," Brittany reassured Addison privately and continued routing the work the same way. "Yes," I said. After that, I think it gets harder to call it accidental. Paige looked down at her notebook. She did not look triumphant. The late truth was not one more stolen recipe. It was a system in which no one besides Brittany had enough information to challenge the story while it was being made. I had known Paige was learning. Aaron had known she was spending long Saturdays there. Addison had known Paige's images appeared in application material. Paige had known some test versions reached the catering menu. Each of us had been told something true. Just not enough truth to compare the pieces. Paige tapped the September photograph where Brittany was teaching her dough technique. "She really did teach me." "Yes. And then she did this." "Yes." Paige stared at the photograph. "I keep wanting one of those things to cancel the other one." "They don't have to," I said. At 9:54, Addison texted Paige a photograph of a handwritten schedule page from her own school planner. "Volleyball practice dates," Paige called her. This time, the girls did not argue about ownership. They compared presents. Addison had been at practice during 2 of Paige's early roll sessions and all of the early tart tests. On the day of the final tart photograph, practice ended at 4, and Brittany had texted Addison at 4:17 asking her to stop by. For the squash pastry, Addison remembered walking into the kitchen when finished dough was already chilling. For the rolls, she remembered arriving after Paige had mixed them. "It was always like that," Addison said slowly over speaker. "I thought you were doing test stuff because you liked test stuff." Paige frowned. "What does that even mean?" "You know what I mean. You like fixing things. That doesn't make it less work." "I know that now." Addison went quiet. Then she said, "Mom always called me after the ugly part was over." Paige looked at the notebook. The ugly part? The failed part? Whatever. The part where it looks bad. That sentence made the pattern visible in a new way. Paige had been given problems. Addison had been given finished things. One girl's labor looked like experimentation. The other girl's presence looked like authorship. Brittany's photographs reinforced the difference. Paige had dozens of close shots of hands, dough, mixing bowls, torn crusts, messy counters, and notebook pages. Addison appeared more often beside finished plates. A clean apron, a finished cake, a tray ready to photograph. "I thought Mom wanted me there because I was better at presentation," Addison said. Paige looked at me. That had probably been partly true, too. Addison was more comfortable in front of a camera. She liked plating. She had a better eye for color than Paige did. Brittany did not need to invent those differences. She only needed to arrange them. At 10:22, Paige took one photograph of our handwritten timeline and sent it to Addison. Not to Heartland yet, just to her cousin. Addison replied with one sentence. "I never saw the beginning." Paige typed back, "I never saw what she told you at the end." Neither girl said anything for almost a minute. Then Addison wrote, "Mom saw both." No single message was a confession or hidden recording. The pattern mattered because the only person consistently present at both ends of the process was Brittany. She knew which decisions Paige made before a dish stabilized. She knew which final stage tasks Addison performed afterward. She knew Paige believed her own portfolio material was being saved. She knew Addison believed Paige's credit was being handled separately. And when either girl got close to the missing middle, Brittany answered privately. I thought back to Thanksgiving. My daughter had said, almost casually, that she wanted to organize her own portfolio over Christmas break. Brittany's smile had held half a second too long. At the time, I thought she was tired. Now I understood what Paige's sentence threatened. Not merely a collection of photographs. Comparison. If Paige put her version histories, dates, and process photos into one place, somebody might eventually notice that the young prodigy portfolio under Addison's name had skipped directly from Paige's failures to Addison's finished plates. Thanksgiving came back to me differently. My daughter could have done this better, had sounded like cruelty. Now it also looked like public positioning. I kept that inference to myself. We did not need to turn every suspicion into evidence. At 10:41, Aaron called. He sounded exhausted. "Are you awake?" "Yes." Brittany had another kitchen problem. I stood and walked toward the hallway so Paige and Addison could keep texting. The contractor had spent the evening working with Brittany's adult staff on the holiday menu. They had stabilized the savory pastry enough to complete the reduced order, but the cast iron rolls were now the bigger problem. Brittany's written production notes described ingredients and approximate proofing, but not the judgment calls Paige had learned across 4 versions. The first commercial test under the contractor's adjusted method rose too fast in the warmer shared kitchen environment. The second baked evenly, but came out tighter than the sample photographs Brittany had used to sell the holiday package. A client who had booked the rolls as part of a December brunch package had asked why the sample and current test batch looked different. Brittany had offered a substitution while the kitchen team kept testing. "How bad?" I asked. "Not catastrophe, yet." That word mattered. Aaron said Brittany had already spent extra kitchen hours and contractor fees trying to standardize 2 menu items. The earlier partial refund remained small, but now another order needed adjustment. A repeat client had also paused discussion of a larger January event until Brittany confirmed what menu she could reliably deliver. Material pressure was no longer theoretical. The problem was capacity, credibility, and time, the hidden dependency becoming visible because Paige was no longer feeding it. Aaron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She keeps asking me to get Paige on the phone." "No, I know. What does she want?" The exact process notes, the rolls mostly, and the pastry. She says Paige can tell the contractor in 10 minutes what they're missing. I looked through the doorway. Paige was sitting cross-legged on her chair, her notebook open, reading something Addison had just sent. 10 minutes. Brittany had always broken Paige's usefulness into requests small enough not to look like leverage. Taste this. Check this. Tell me what's wrong. What did you tell her? I asked. That I'm not asking Paige. Good. Aaron exhaled. She says I'm letting one family fight damage everybody. Brittany had shifted the frame again, away from authorship and toward collateral damage. I heard a door close on his end. Then Brittany's voice, farther away. Aaron? He lowered his voice. I have to go. The call ended. I returned to the kitchen. Paige looked up. What happened? I told her exactly what Aaron told me. No exaggeration. No lesson attached. The rolls were inconsistent. The pastry had cost them extra time. Another menu substitution might be needed. A repeat client had paused a larger booking. Brittany wanted Paige's process knowledge. Paige stared at the notebook. I watched the answer happen in her face before she spoke. She knew what was wrong, or at least she believed she did. The shared kitchen is warmer, she said automatically. If they're using the same proof time. She stopped. Her mouth closed. I said nothing. Addison, still on speaker, said softly, You don't have to fix it. Paige rubbed both hands over her face. I know. But knowing she did not have to was not the same as no longer wanting to. Cooking problems still pulled at Paige. Brittany had not invented that quality in her. She had learned how to use it. At 11:07, someone knocked on our front door. Not pounding this time. 3 firm knocks. Paige froze. I checked the window. Brittany stood on the porch. Alone. Her coat was open despite the cold. Her hair had been pulled into a loose knot, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, she did not look composed. I did not open the door immediately. Paige came into the hallway behind me. You don't have to talk to her, I said. I know. Do you want me to tell her to leave? Paige looked through the narrow glass beside the door. No. I unlocked it but stayed in the doorway. Cold air slid across the floor. Brittany looked at me, only long enough to understand I was not moving. Then she looked at Paige. For a second, none of us spoke. The woman on my porch was still the aunt who had taught my daughter how to rescue torn laminated dough. She was still the woman who had laughed at her own jokes, bought her a green apron, and told her she had a real palate. She was also the woman whose version of Paige had shrunk from gifted to testing assistant the moment credit became expensive. Brittany's eyes went to the black notebook in Paige's hand. Her face changed. Not anger, recognition, need. Paige, she said. My daughter did not step forward. Brittany swallowed. I need you one more time. For a second after Brittany said it, nobody moved. I need you one more time. The sentence landed differently now, because we finally understood what had been hidden inside it for nearly a year. There had always been 2 meanings. The affectionate one Paige heard the aunt who trusted her taste, wanted her opinion, believed she could solve something. And the practical one Brittany had never said out loud, the business owner and mother who had built plans around the fact that Paige would keep supplying whatever knowledge was missing. Standing on my porch, late Saturday night, Brittany did not look like the confident woman who had laughed across a Thanksgiving table. She looked tired, cold, and very aware that the black notebook in Paige's hand contained answers she no longer controlled. Paige did not invite her in. Neither did I. That afternoon, Heartland had sent a second clarification, after receiving the girls' factual account. Addison would remain provisionally eligible for Sunday's practical because the live exercise was part of the verification process. No award decision would be made until the provenance review was complete. The message also stated something we had not needed to think about before. Once a finalist completed official check-in, no parent, mentor, family member, teacher, or other outside person could coach the finalist on the selected dish, process explanation, or evaluator questions. Anything Addison learned before check-in was her responsibility. Anything supplied after check-in could disqualify the practical itself. That created a very small window. Brittany knew it. She looked at Paige. "I'm not asking you to write her answers." Paige's fingers tightened around the notebook. "I'm asking you to sit with her once," Brittany continued. "Tonight. Tomorrow morning? I don't care. Walk her through the roles. Tell her what changed and why. Show her the things she honestly doesn't remember because she wasn't there." Paige's face stayed still. "That sounds like giving her the answers. It's teaching her the process." "You mean my process?" Brittany flinched, but recovered quickly. "The process you developed while I was mentoring you." It was the same defense Brittany had used before, true enough to argue about forever. I watched Paige instead of Brittany. I had already learned that protecting her did not mean supplying her answer. Brittany tried a different angle. "Do you know what happens if Addison walks into that room tomorrow and cannot explain the selected dish?" Paige said nothing. "She probably loses the fellowship." Still nothing. "And if Heartland decides the portfolio was materially misrepresented, that follows the application? Maybe they let her apply again somewhere else. Maybe they don't. Nobody knows." "That's not Paige's responsibility," I said. Brittany's eyes snapped to me. "I wasn't talking to you." For once, I was glad to hear it. She turned back to Paige. "There are also 3 holiday orders still on the calendar. We've already reduced one and refunded part of another. I have ingredients bought, kitchen time booked, 2 people scheduled, and clients who planned events around what I promised them. If I cut more, we lose several $1,000s between refunds, unused prep, and deposits I have to return." Paige's expression changed at the word clients. Not guilt exactly. Attention. Brittany saw it. "The contractor can make the food," she said quickly. "This is not about needing a child to cook. It's about the corrections that never made it into the written process. You know them. 10 minutes with me could save hours of failed testing." There was the second ask, hidden inside the first. Not only teach Addison the development history, teach Brittany's adult kitchen team what Paige had learned. The fellowship and the business were no longer separate pressures. They had come from the same missing thing. Knowledge Brittany had treated as available because Paige had always been available. Paige looked down at the notebook. Brittany softened her voice. "I know you're angry." Paige looked up. "I'm not just angry. I know. No, I don't think you do." Brittany opened her mouth, but Paige shook her head. "I'm not answering tonight." The sentence stopped all 3 of us. Brittany stared at her. "The practical is tomorrow." "I know. The check-in is in the morning." "I know. I am asking for one conversation before then." Paige's voice did not rise. "And I'm telling you I'm not answering tonight." For a moment I thought Brittany might push past the boundary just because it existed. Instead, she looked at me, then at Paige, then at the notebook again. "Fine," she said. "But when tomorrow comes, this doesn't get easier." Paige gave no answer. Brittany stepped back from the porch. Before she turned away, she said, "Ask your uncle what happens if I have to refund the rest." Then she walked to her car. I closed the door only after her taillights disappeared. Paige stood in the hallway with the notebook against her chest. I wanted to ask what she was going to do. I had asked that question so many times it had become almost another form of pressure. So I asked something else. "Do you want tea?" She looked at me as if I had offered her a tire iron. Then unexpectedly, she laughed once. "Yeah," she said. "Tea." That was all we did for 20 minutes. At 11:38, Addison called. She sounded worse than she had all week. Brittany had told her almost the same thing, except the version for Addison was built around sacrifice. Her mother had said Paige could save the fellowship with one honest prep session and that refusing to learn what she needed before the practical would be making a point with your own future. Addison told us she had spent the last hour looking at the withdrawal button on Heartland's finalist portal. I could just stop, she said. Paige sat at the kitchen table with both hands around her mug. Do you want to? I don't know. Then don't do it because you think I want you to. I'm not. You sound like you are. Addison let out a breath. I'm trying to figure out what showing up means now. That was a harder question than whether she deserved the fellowship. The portfolio contained real work she had done, and work credited to her that she had not. Heartland had not thrown her out. They had asked her to appear, cook, and answer questions while the authorship review stayed open. Withdrawing would protect her from having to face the gap between the polished application and what she actually knew. Attending meant stepping into that gap publicly. Paige did not tell her to be brave. She did not tell her to quit. She said, "Your cake is yours." I know. The squash pastry is partly yours. I know. You did real stuff. I know. Then if you go for that. Addison was silent. Paige looked at me once, then back at the phone. Don't go because your mom says you can still save the story. Go because you're willing to let them see what is actually yours. I could hear the difference between that sentence and coaching. Paige was not telling Addison how to answer an evaluator. She was refusing to let the only choices belie or disappear. Addison said, "What if they ask about the roles?" Paige's eyes dropped to the black notebook. "I don't know what you should say. You do know the history. That's not the same thing." The sentence stayed between them. Addison finally said, "I think I'm going." Paige did not smile. "Okay. I might change my mind at 7 in the morning. Okay. And I don't know what I'm going to say if they ask me something I can't answer." "Okay." Addison made a frustrated sound. "Can you stop saying okay?" Paige looked almost offended. "My mom does it to me. It's annoying, right?" For the first time that night, both girls laughed. Not because anything was fixed, because for 1 second, they were cousins again. Later, after Addison hung up, Paige opened the notebook but did not read it. She rested one palm on the cover. "I could teach her," she said. I was drawing a cup. "Yes, I could probably get her through the process questions. Probably. I could tell her exactly why version 2 was dry and why version 3 spread and what I changed before version 4. Yes." She looked at me. "And she could probably make them." "Yes." Paige stared down at the cover. "That's what makes it hard." I understood. If she were unable to help, there would be no choice. If Addison were cruel, there would be less conflict. If Brittany's business were collapsing because nobody could boil water, the whole thing would be ridiculous. The pressure existed because Paige genuinely could help people she cared about, and helping had once been the language through which she understood love. "What if they really do need me?" she asked. Paige had finally asked the question underneath the recipes and applications. I sat across from her. "They might." Her eyes lifted. I did not tell her need was fake. It was not. Brittany's catering process really had gaps. Addison really did not know the development history. The clients were real, the refunds were real, the fellowship mattered. I said, "The question isn't whether they need you." Paige waited. "It's what you want their need to require from you." She looked back at the notebook. That was as far as I went. Just after midnight, Aaron called. He asked to speak to both of us, so Paige put him on speaker. His voice sounded flat, the way people sound after arguing so long that anger has used up all the oxygen in a room. Brittany had asked him to move money from their joint emergency savings into the business account. Not because the business was bankrupt. It wasn't. The money would cover refunds and replacement costs if she had to reduce 2 more December orders and pay extra shared kitchen hours to standardize the menu without Paige's notes. "How much?" I asked. "Enough that I'm not pretending it's nothing," he said. "Not enough that we lose the house. A few thousand if everything goes badly." That matched the scale we had been told from the beginning. Painful, real, not catastrophe. Paige said, "Are you going to do it?" Aaron took a moment. "No." She looked at me. Aaron continued, "I told Brittany I'll pay obligations we already agreed were household obligations. I'm not emptying emergency savings to make this disappear like nothing happened." I heard a door close somewhere on his end. Then he said, "And I'm not calling you to ask for recipe notes." Paige's shoulders lowered slightly. "She asked you to," I said. "She asked me to remind Paige that people have jobs attached to these orders." Paige's face tightened. Aaron's voice sharpened for the first time. "I told her the adults running the business are responsible for the business." No speech followed. He did not ask for praise. That made the boundary feel more real. He had spent years treating peace as the highest good in his house. Now he was accepting that some conflict was the price of not shifting consequences onto the youngest person in the room. Paige asked, "Is Addison okay?" "She's scared." "Is she still going tomorrow?" "She says she is." Aaron paused. "Brittany says going without prep is stupid." Paige looked at the notebook again. Aaron added, "I told Addison, it's her decision." After the call, Paige took the notebook upstairs. She did not ask me to lock it away. She did not leave it on the kitchen table as a test. She simply carried it with her. Sunday morning, December 7th, Columbus woke under a low gray sky that looked almost white at the horizon. The Heartland Practical was being held in a teaching kitchen inside a regional culinary institute downtown. Finalists were told to arrive by 8:30 for registration, equipment assignment, and safety briefing. Official check-in closed at 8:45. After that, no outside coaching. The public observation area opened at 9. Morgan, the week before, would have made a checklist. Extra charger, water, printed emails, notebook, screenshots, backup screenshots. I made 1 coffee. Paige came downstairs at 7 wearing jeans, a navy sweater, and the green apron Brittany had once given her folded inside her tote. She had put it there the night before, then taken it out, then put it back. I looked at the apron. She followed my eyes. "I'm not wearing it." "Okay." I just didn't want it at home. "Okay." She gave me the same irritated look she had given Addison. I almost smiled. We left at 7:40. Halfway downtown, Paige's phone buzzed. "Brittany." She did not open the message immediately. At a red light, she finally looked. I did not ask. She read it, locked the phone, and stared out the window. 3 blocks later, she said, "She says there's still time." I kept my eyes on the road. "For what?" "To meet before check-in." I waited. "She says 10 minutes. The phrase made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. 10 minutes sounded harmless. That was why it was dangerous. 10 minutes was enough to explain the hydration change. Enough to tell Addison which failed batch had been overproofed. Enough to give her language about why browned butter stayed while the yeast amount changed. Enough to turn lived process into memorized process. And because it would happen before official check-in, it would not technically violate Heartland's no coaching rule. The rule could keep Brittany out of the room after 8:45. It could not decide what Paige chose to give away before then. When we reached the institute, Aaron's car was already in the parking garage. Addison stood beside it in a black coat with her finalist tote over one shoulder. Aaron was next to her. Brittany was not there. Paige noticed immediately. "Where is she?" Aaron answered carefully. "She drove separately." Addison looked exhausted but composed. "She wanted to come with me. I said no." Paige nodded once. No celebration, no hug. Just recognition that another small piece of control had moved. Inside, volunteers directed finalists toward a registration hall. Parents and guests were given visitor badges and told the public observation room would open later. A sign beside the doors listed the schedule. 8:15, 8:45 finalist check-in. 8, 8:45 closed safety briefing. 9:00 practical begins. 11:15 evaluator review. The clock over the lobby desk read 8:19. 26 minutes until the door closed on outside help. Addison saw it too. Her hand tightened on the strap of her tote. "You can still withdraw," Erin said. She looked at him. "I know. I'm not telling you to." "I know," he nodded. Paige stood a few feet away. The black notebook was inside her bag. Nobody mentioned it. That restraint felt more dramatic to me than if someone had been guarding a vault. A Heartland staff member called Addison's name and handed her a registration packet. She signed the attendance line, but had not yet completed official check-in. Finalists still had to verify their station number and surrender phones before entering the closed area. 8:24. Addison looked at Paige. "I'm going to go in." Paige nodded. "I don't know what happens after." "I know." Addison almost smiled. Then a voice behind us said, "Not yet, Brittany." She came through the lobby doors, carrying no coat, only a leather bag and a paper cup she was gripping too hard. Her eyes went first to Addison, then to Erin, then to Paige. Erin stepped between them by instinct. Brittany stopped. "I'm not here to make a scene." Erin said, "Then don't. I need 10 minutes." Paige did not move. A volunteer called another finalist toward check-in. The clock changed to 8:25. Brittany lowered her voice. "Paige, listen to me. I am not asking you to lie. I am not asking you to write anything. I am asking you to walk Addison through the process she is about to be questioned on. If she tells them afterward that you taught her this morning, fine. Put your name on it. I don't care anymore." Addison stared at her mother. "You care," she said. Brittany ignored her. She looked only at Paige. "The business can recover," she said. "The refunds can be paid. I can rebuild the menu. But this chance does not come back next week. You know that." Paige's hand moved toward the strap of her bag. Brittany saw it. So did I. She stepped closer, stopping before anyone could accuse her of crowding Paige. 10 minutes, she said. "That's all. Tell her what failed. Tell her what changed. She can decide what to do with it." The check-in doors opened again. A staff member called, "Addison Hayes?" Addison looked toward the door. Brittany looked at Paige. I understood why I had to stay quiet. Brittany had spent a year treating Paige's usefulness as permission. I would not turn my fear into a different kind of permission. So I stayed where I was. 8:26. Brittany's voice dropped until only the four of us could hear it. "I need you," she said. "Just 10 minutes." Paige looked at the practical door. Then she looked at her aunt. Paige looked at Brittany for several seconds. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee, floor polish, and the warm butter coming through the double doors from the practical kitchen. Behind us, volunteers were checking names against a clipboard. Ahead of us, a digital clock over the registration table read 8:27. Official check-in closed at 8:45. 10 minutes was exactly what Brittany had asked for. 10 minutes was also enough time to hand Addison the sequence she did not know. When the dough first went slack, which change had fixed the texture, why the proofing time had moved, what Paige had learned from the batch that collapsed in the center. 10 minutes could turn somebody else's missing history into a smooth answer. Brittany must have seen the calculation in Paige's face, because she softened her voice. "I'm not asking you to lie." Paige did not answer. "I'm asking you to help your cousin understand something you already know." Brittany was still trying to turn help into obligation, as if knowing how to solve a problem made refusing to solve it cruel. I kept my hands at my sides. I wanted to step in, but Paige had already taught me what deciding for her could cost. Brittany looked past her toward Addison. "She can still do this. She can still show them what she knows. You're not giving her answers. You're filling in the background." Addison's face tightened. She was standing near the wall, with her candidate badge still in its plastic sleeve, not yet clipped to her sweater. Aaron was beside her, silent. He had looked older every time I had seen him that week. Paige finally spoke. "You said you needed me." Brittany's shoulders loosened by a fraction, as if she thought she had found the right door. "I do." Paige nodded once. "I know, that isn't the same as valuing me." Nothing dramatic happened after she said it. No one gasped. No music rose behind us. A volunteer at the registration table kept sorting pens into a cup. Someone rolled a stainless steel cart past the far end of the hall. But Brittany's face emptied. Paige had not raised her voice. She had not listed the hours, the photographs, the messages, the Thanksgiving table, or the roles everyone had laughed at. She did not need to. The sentence held all of it without dragging any of it back out. Brittany tried once more. "Paige." "No." My daughter glanced at the clock. "I'm not doing the 10 minutes. Then she turned away. That was the first half of the answer. The second belonged to Addison. At 8:34, Addison walked to registration and clipped the badge to her sweater. She did not withdraw. She signed the check-in sheet, handed over her phone as required, and followed the other finalists through the doors. Paige and I waited with the other guests until the public observation area opened, then went in. The room was arranged like a small teaching theater. A glass wall separated us from the practical kitchen, though overhead speakers carried the evaluator's instructions into the seating area. There were no cheering sections, no signs, no parents leaning over rails, just rows of folding seats, a few families speaking in low voices, and a long kitchen beyond the glass, where each student had an assigned station. Paige sat beside me with her black notebook closed on her lap. She had not brought it to coach anyone. I knew that because she had told me so in the car. She had brought it because it was hers. Brittany sat 3 seats to our left. Aaron took the chair between her and the aisle. They were close enough that I could hear the scrape of Brittany's sleeve when she folded and unfolded her arms, but not close enough for conversation. The practical began with a short skills portion, then moved into each finalist's selected dish. Addison's station was near the center. From where I sat, I could see the angle of her shoulders and the way she kept wiping her palms on the sides of her apron before touching anything. She was not helpless in a kitchen. That had never been true. She measured accurately. She handled her dough gently. When an evaluator asked why she was resting it before shaping, she gave a clear answer about gluten relaxation and texture. Those were things she knew, things she had learned, things that belonged to her. Paige watched without moving. Watching Addison work made the distinction impossible to ignore. She had skill. Brittany had taught both girls real things, and Paige had learned real things from Brittany. The harm had lasted because so much around it was genuine. That was what made the lie durable. About 40 minutes in, one of the evaluators stopped at Addison's station. She was a woman with silver hair tied at the nape of her neck and a pen tucked into the top of her clipboard. I had seen her name in the program materials, but what mattered was the question she asked. "Walk me through how this recipe changed from your first version to this one." The room around me seemed to narrow. Addison looked down at the dough in front of her. The evaluator waited. This was the question we had known was coming. The question Brittany had spent 10 days trying to build a safe answer around. The question 10 private minutes could have repaired. Addison lifted her eyes. "I can tell you the parts I did." The evaluator's expression did not change. "Go ahead." Addison explained the final shaping she had practiced, the presentation choice she had made, and a glaze adjustment she had suggested late in the process. Her voice shook at first, then steadied because she was speaking from memory instead of performance. Then she stopped. "The early development wasn't mine." Brittany inhaled sharply beside Aaron. Addison continued before anyone could interrupt. "My cousin Paige developed the first versions and most of the changes that made the dough work. I didn't know that when the portfolio was submitted the way I should have known it. I thought our work had been credited differently. I should have checked with her. The evaluator looked at her clipboard, then back at Addison. The evaluator glanced toward the notes already attached to Addison's file. What happened in the earliest failed batch? Addison's eyes flicked once toward the observation glass. Not toward Paige, exactly more toward the place where she knew we were sitting. Then she looked back at the evaluator. I wasn't there. The words landed harder than any polished explanation could have. What stage did you enter the development? Near the end, I practiced shaping. I helped with the final look. I suggested changing the glaze because the first one dried dull. Addison drew a breath. My mom told me Paige and I were building the work together and that Paige was being credited separately. I believed that because it was easier than checking. The evaluator asked whether Paige had ever told Addison she could submit the recipe as primarily her own. No. Did Paige approve the portfolio description? No. Addison's face flushed, but she kept going. I should have asked her before it was submitted. I didn't. That part is mine. From the seat beside me, Paige let out a breath so slowly I almost missed it. She was hearing something different from an apology. Addison was not asking to be excused because Brittany had misled her. She was separating what had been done to her from what she had failed to do herself. Are you saying the submitted description overstates your authorship? Yes. A long silence passed through the speakers. Addison swallowed. I made parts of this. I did not invent all of it. I'm not going to say I did. Paige's fingers tightened around the edge of her notebook. The evaluator thanked Addison, made a note, and asked 2 factual follow-up questions about the portion Addison said was hers. Addison answered one cleanly. On the other, she admitted she did not know. Then the evaluator moved on. That was all. No one escorted Brittany out. No panel member praised Paige. No one turned the practical into a courtroom. The other finalists kept working. Timers kept sounding. An oven door opened. Someone at the far station dropped a spoon and picked it up. The system Brittany had built did not collapse because an authority figure exposed her. It collapsed because the person whose work had been used refused to supply the missing knowledge, and the person who had benefited refused to keep claiming it. For the rest of the practical, Addison worked with what she actually knew. Sometimes that was enough, sometimes it was not. She finished. When the session ended, candidates were told that final decisions would not be announced that morning. Because Addison's submission was already under provenance review, the fellowship staff would compare her statements with the factual clarification, the existing portfolio record, and the materials already provided. No one asked Paige to prove herself at a counter. Her notebook remained closed. Outside the building, the December air felt almost metallic in my lungs. Addison came through the doors first. Her face was pale, but she was not crying. Paige stood. For a moment, neither girl knew what to do with her hands. Then Addison said, I'm sorry. Paige looked at her. Not just for the portfolio. I could tell by the way Addison glanced away that Thanksgiving was there too, the laughter. The easy assumption that Paige would absorb the joke, the weeks in which it had been convenient not to ask harder questions. Paige did not rush to make her feel better. Okay, she said quietly. It was not forgiveness, but it was not rejection either. It left room. Brittany came out several minutes later with Aaron. She did not look at me. Her eyes went straight to Paige, then to Addison. You had a chance, she said to her daughter. Aaron's head turned. Don't. 2 weeks earlier, he would have said her name softly, trying to sand the edge off the moment. This time there was nothing soft in it. Brittany's mouth closed. We went home. The fellowship decision arrived the following afternoon. Addison called Paige before Aaron called me, which told me more about what had changed between the girls than any speech could have. The program had completed enough of its review to determine that the portfolio did not meet its authorship disclosure requirements. Several pieces had been presented in a way that materially overstated Addison's original development and failed to identify Paige's primary contribution. Addison would not remain eligible for that year's fellowship award. She lost the scholarship opportunity and the summer apprenticeship. Paige looked miserable when she told me. I wanted her to get something, she said, just not for something that wasn't hers. That was the cruel edge Brittany had counted on from the beginning. Paige could tell the truth and still care what it cost someone else. Those things were not opposites. Do you wish you hadn't sent the clarification? I asked. Paige stared at the dark screen of her phone. No. The answer came without anger. I wish the truth had been cheaper. I reached for her hand, then stopped before touching it. She saw me stop and turned her palm upward, so I took it. She had not lost every path forward. The email itself said she could apply to other programs later with work whose development she could fully document. It still hurt. When Paige got off the phone, she sat at the kitchen table for a while without speaking. I made tea and left it near her elbow. Is she okay? I asked. No. Paige traced the rim of the mug with one finger. Are you? She thought about it. I don't know yet. That answer was healthier than some of the brave ones I had wanted from her. The business consequences took longer because real consequences usually do. There was no single afternoon when Brittany's catering company vanished. She still had licensed kitchen access. She still had adult workers. She still knew how to cook. What she no longer had was the invisible development stream she had treated as if it belonged to her. The first week after the practical, she reduced the remaining holiday menu. Erin told me she refunded 2 orders she could no longer produce at the promised consistency and scaled back a third rather than risk another failure. The money was painful but not ruinous. Then a repeat client declined to book a larger next season event after the holiday changes and the uncertainty around several menu items. That hurt more because it was future business, the kind Brittany had been counting before it existed. Erin did exactly what he had said he would do. He did not empty their emergency savings to make every consequence disappear. He covered ordinary household obligations. He did not let bills become a weapon against Addison. But the refunds, the lost deposits, and the cost of overcommitting stayed attached to the business decisions that had created them. When he told me that over the phone, he sounded tired. I kept thinking keeping the peace meant preventing the worst thing from happening, he said. Mostly, I was preventing anybody from having to admit what was already happening. I did not tell him he had become wise. My brother had spent too many years arriving late to facts that made him uncomfortable. I told him I hoped he kept paying attention. He said he would try. Brittany never gave me the apology people imagine should end stories like this. There was no evening on my porch where she confessed every motive and named every lie. By then, I did not need one. She sent Paige one message before Christmas. It said she was sorry things had gotten so out of control, and that she had always believed Paige was talented. Paige read it once. She did not answer. A few months earlier, being called talented by Brittany would have lit her from the inside. I had seen it happen. One sentence of approval could buy Brittany an entire Saturday. Now Paige set the phone face down and went back to homework. That was when I understood the punishment Brittany had not expected. It was simpler than the fellowship, the refunds, or the lost client. She had lost access to the part of Paige that once ran toward being needed. By January, the black notebook moved from the kitchen counter to Paige's desk for a different reason. She started building her own portfolio, not a revenge portfolio. Not a folder labeled with every wrong thing Brittany had done. Just her work, documented the way she wished it had always been documented. She photographed first tests, as well as final plates. She wrote dates under changes. If Addison had helped with plating on a dish, Paige wrote that down. If a recipe began from a technique Brittany had genuinely taught her, she noted the technique and then documented what she changed. Watching her do that was strange at first. I had spent weeks thinking evidence existed to defend her. Paige used it to define herself. Addison came over twice that winter. The first time, they barely cooked. They sat at the table comparing ideas for separate school projects and argued about whether orange zest belonged in a chocolate tart. The second time, Addison asked Paige how she got a custard to set without turning rubbery. Paige started to answer automatically. Then she paused. Do you want me to show you? Or do you want to figure it out and have me taste it? Addison considered that. Let me figure it out. Paige smiled. There was no ceremony to it, but I heard the old system breaking one small piece at a time. By early March, the sharpest part of Thanksgiving had stopped living in our house. I could open the refrigerator without seeing foil pans stacked inside after I had carried every dish home. I could hear someone laugh at dinner without watching Paige's shoulders. Paige could make rolls without the room changing temperature. One Saturday, she decided to cook for 6 people. Not clients, not judges, not relatives she was trying to impress. Just me, Addison, Aaron, a friend from school, and the friend's mother. She planned a simple meal and then ignored half her plan because she wanted to test a new herb butter. The kitchen got messy. One batch of rolls browned too quickly on the bottom. Paige swore under her breath, moved the rack, and wrote a note in the margin of her notebook. No one photographed anything unless she asked. No one called the food embarrassing. No one told her she was a prodigy. When the table was nearly ready, I found her standing at the counter with flour on one cheek, looking at a bowl of potatoes, as if she had forgotten why she had walked across the kitchen. Need help? I asked. She glanced at the sink, then at the table. For a second, the old Paige might have said no. The girl who proved she deserved a place by doing everything herself. The girl who heard Nita's love and exhaustion as evidence that she mattered. This Paige handed me a serving bowl. Yeah, she said. Stay. So I stayed. I did not take over. I carried what she handed me. I opened the oven when she asked. I sat down when she sat down. At the table, Aaron complimented the rolls. Addison disagreed with him about the herb butter. Paige's friend asked for seconds. Somebody laughed with a mouthful of food. Paige laughed too. Then she reached for her water, took another bite, and kept talking. She never looked around the table to see whether anyone approved.